Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
A young man, a lawyer. In the dentist's chair, he's wiggling his face, waving his hands, making strange, muffled noises. Just a little more patience. The dentist calms him down. Just a little bit more. The doctor raises his head, looks for his assistant with his eyes, points to some device with his gaze and waits. Nancy gets angry. Doctor, stop flying in the clouds. Guess what? The young woman looks at the doctor confused, then quickly grabs the appliance and hands it to the dentist. The patient continues to fidget in the chair. His eyes are full of confusion and pain. He is mooing, poking his fingers into his mouth. The doctor frowns. To remove the saliva, he clarifies. The patient nods his head in relief. He stretches his hand up and gives the doctor a thumbs up. The dentist drills his gaze back to the assistant. Nancy, are you keeping an eye on the patient? His voice changes to a shout. Yes, sorry. Nancy picks up the appliance and sets it in motion. Aya, I'm sorry. The assistant continues to apologize. The dentist, disgruntled, shakes his head disappointedly. When the procedure is over and the patient's extension or mouth is taken out, he quickly rises from the chair. He moves behind his warm jaw, runs his hands over his face, spits it out into a special jar and looks reproachfully at Nancy. George. He turns to the doctor. Where'd you pick your assistant like that? The center for the retarded. I almost choked on my own saliva. He's trying to get to his feet, but he's not doing so well. A lot of people are quiet after being horizontal for so long. Change the assistant, or I won't be back for a second appointment. This is outrageous. I will complain. George the dentist calmly listens to the young man's complaints. He puts on a benevolent smile, conciliatingly says, I agree with you completely. I'm sorry. I'll change the assistant by the next appointment. The young man nods contentedly, breaking out in a cold sweat. What do you mean I'll change assistants? The woman thinks in confusion. I can't lose my job. Her hands shake. Her legs become absorbent cotton from heavy thinking. She's snapped out of it by a patient's voice. Look at her. She's probably drinking like a horse. He's visibly angry. He takes a step toward Nancy and points his finger angrily at her. I wish you all the worst. The dentist approached the young man and took him gently, almost friendly, under the elbow. Well, shall we go to payment? Aha, let's go. The boy nodded sternly and followed the doctor. George led the patient away from the office. Nancy began to clean up. Her mind was spinning not to fire. She herself realized that she had been doing a bad job lately because of the problems that had accumulated like a snowball at home. The woman had almost stopped sleeping. She stopped at the sink, looked up and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her once thick and colorful hair, having lost its former beauty, was sloppily gathered into a tiny bundle. The gray strands were mixed with some gray faded hair color. The hair used to be a different color. Had it been? Deep wrinkles, like ditches. If the wrinkles were filled with water, they would turn into rivers of circles under her eyes' dull, earthy, clear complexion. Nancy had no time to notice when she had aged so much. She didn't even notice when her life turned into a real survival of the fittest. Nancy, what's wrong with you? The doctor crept up from behind. The woman quickly turned around to face him. Even from behind his glasses, the fierce look of dark eyes could be seen. You know very well yourself. You're not the first patient to complain about you. What are you getting paid for here? George, forgive me, Nancy, I began to justify myself. You know my James is sick, Kevin, he's The woman clutched at her heart. The doctor helped her into the nearest chair. He gently began the conversation. I understand, Nancy. I understand perfectly well. But understand me and understand our patients. If I'm in your position all the time, maybe it's time you stepped into mine. I've already had 2 regulars this week who switched from signing up with Anatoly to me. You do realize that you and I are losing our legitimate raises because of this. Nancy guiltily, she lowered her head. It won't happen again. I promise I'll be careful. No one will ever complain about me. The doctor sighed and shook his head. Tell me how many hours you slept this night as well. Nancy hesitated for a moment. I don't. And how are you, my dear, going to work carefully if you can't even get a good night's sleep? Nancy, we're not making sausage in a factory. I'm a doctor. These are living people. It's important and necessary to be attentive, focused, and careful. The woman remained silent. Her gaze was fixed on the floor. George exhaled loudly. That's it. I'm not going to fire you. I know how much you need the money. Nancy raised her head. She looked gratefully at her boss. Thank you, I wasn't finished. He's been hanging around for a while. I'll give you a couple weeks off to drink. Take care of your family. Take care of your problems. We'll see what happens from there. George, I'm a doctor. I interrupted a woman. Nancy, that's it. You're free to go. What am I going to do without money? I need to work. I need to feed my family. The doctor's eyes rounded with surprise. He took off his glasses, rubbed his arm, and shifted. You're married, Nancy. Maybe you're earning money, I suppose. That's it, go now. I've got an appointment coming up. And I still have to find a free assistant. You're on paid vacation for 2 weeks. Don't come back before then. We'll see about that. He put his glasses back on and walked briskly. He left the office. Nancy cupped her face with her hands. That meant the conversation was over. The woman walked home. It was late spring. The fruit trees were covered in white branches. The grass was getting stronger and stronger. Nancy turned into the yard to shorten her driveway. Usually she took the bus home, but today even $3 couldn't be extra now. Money was getting scarce. Nancy's salary was the only steady income in the large family. George was right. The woman was indeed married, except for her husband. He couldn't be relied on at all. He didn't have a steady job. There wasn't a month that went by without a man holding down a job until the end and getting scandalously fired. He tried honestly, found some part-time work, but every time he failed. He drank like hell and couldn't go to the workplace anymore. He swore he wouldn't drink anymore, swore, crawled on his knees. But every time, the same scenario happened over and over again. He drove, came to his senses, found a new job, and went back to drinking. Nancy had given up hope for him. She lived with him out of inertia, after all, 2 kids and 25 years of marriage. And there was nowhere to go. The family's only property was a small 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. Nancy's life was difficult, depressing, and one might even say unbearable. Nancy kept walking. She walked along long gray 5-story buildings surrounded by a patch of swords, unevenly sheared from the bushes by a couple of weeds. Now and then bumping into local alcoholics and other marginalized people. The sun was already setting. Nancy passed by a playground where some noisy group of teenagers were sitting. She looked in their direction and was horrified. The young boys were drowning in cigarette smoke. Each of them had a bottle of beer or some other alcoholic beverage. The woman raised her eyes to the sky and said to herself, God, if only Kevin were home, if only Kevin were from the playground, came a drunken boy's voice. Kevin bet you can't drink a bottle of whiskey in one gulp. Her oldest son, Kevin, a 10th grader, had gotten involved with some bad company lately. She's punished her son, kept him home, deprived him of money, but all to no avail. The teenager, sure that parents do not understand anything, ran away and openly spit on the moral teachings of his mother. At first, when he was just beginning to enter the difficult age of transition, Nancy prayed that her son would not start smoking. A couple days later, she found a pack of cigarettes in his room. Then the woman feared to her heart's content to discover that her son had tried alcohol, especially with such a heredity. Thought the woman was a week away. A drunken Kevin was brought home by some suspicious men. Now Nancy's praying to God for something else. For God to get Kevin off drugs. But sadly, her prayers were not answered. Toward the end of the school year, she received a call from the school informing her that Kevin had been spotted doing something strange in the restroom. The woman barely managed to convince the principal not to call the police to the school. But her son was not promoted to 11th grade. The woman cried, urged Kevin to come to his senses, to stop smoking, quit pot, to study. But he just brusquely waved his mother away. It turned out that he stopped going to school at the end of winter. The boy did not appear at home every day either. The woman cried and prayed, prayed and cried. She didn't know how else she could influence her son. Hearing the name of her oldest child, Nancy stopped. Staring, straining her eyes to the point of pain, she hoped it wasn't her eldest son there amongst the rowdy bunch of bullies, some other Kevin's alien, wayward child. With all her might, she began to listen to the conversation on the playground. "Make that too." Laughing, the teenager replied. The woman's heart clenched with pain. She recognized the voice. It was her son. With deliberate confidence, she walked toward the playground, shouting loudly to Kevin, "Kevin, go home." A stern tone reprimanded the woman as she approached the children. The teenagers laughed loudly. Some jumped up and ran away. And some continued to sit there, holding out their beers. Maybe the parents of those kids didn't care about them. Or maybe they couldn't handle the situation as well as Nancy herself. Kevin yelled at his laughing friends and moved toward his mother, his staggered cigarette in his hand. "Don't embarrass me. Get out of here," snapped the teenager. Son, let's go home." "What are you doing here?" "You still have to take exams next year to enter the institute." Nancy tried to take her son's hand. He brusquely waved it away. "Leave me alone." "I don't give a shit about your institute." He spat loudly on the ground. "Kevin, you wanted to be an economist." The woman started to lose her temper. "I'm a mom. Are you delusional? Get off." He turned around, shouted to his friends to leave. The company obediently got up and followed him. Tears came to Nancy's eyes. She stared at her son's back for a long time. Unable to change anything when he disappeared around the corner, the woman went home. She realized that after such a scandal, Kevin would not come home for a long time. Nancy entered the apartment. She took off her shoes and slipped her feet into tattered old slippers, walked through the narrow hallway, stopped in the bathroom, washed her hands, and found herself in the kitchen. Right at the table, leaning on her arms, bent over, sat her precious husband. He was snoring loudly, and next to him stood an empty whiskey bottle. The woman looked around the room, shabby all-in-darkness walls once painted in a pleasant turquoise color, old, yellowed refrigerator from the old days, dirty with black spots of chips and painters, the bathroom, the sink. She closed her eyes powerlessly. She wanted the old apartment to magically turn into a new one with a beautiful modern interior. Lately, the woman had been dreaming of renovation, but there was no way to do it. And how all this money, a lot of money. And as you know, this very money in the family did not have. So what should she do? She exhaled loudly and opened her eyes. The interior hadn't changed. In front of her still rose a mountain of unwashed dishes and the same dirty blue-gray walls. Her husband hadn't changed either. He was also lying with his head on the table, and that head of his had not at all grown back his curly hair. She poked her husband lightly on the shoulder and shouted, Frank, get up." The man raised his head, looked around the kitchen with a blank, uncomprehending stare. He mumbled something and dropped his head back on the table with a clatter. After a couple seconds, he clapped again. Nancy waved his hand irritably in his direction. I reached into the refrigerator, pulled out a pot of uncomplicated and simple food, put it on the stove to heat. I put the food on 2 deep plates for myself and my youngest son. Ran to change into home clothes, quickly put on an old, confused robe, returned to the kitchen, put the plates on a tray, and headed for the small room. Turn off the kitchen light beforehand. Let her husband sleep at the kitchen table tonight. She went into her son's room, where the youngest sat staring at an old computer screen. James, hi. She walked forward, placing a plate of dinner in front of her son. How are you? Hi. The boy looked away, then stared at the monitor again. What's up, Daddy got drunk again? James asked in as casual and calm a tone as if he were wondering what was for dinner today. Drunk. Nancy answered thoughtfully. Have you done all of today's assignments? Didn't forget anything, the woman inquired. Her youngest son could not go to school due to illness, so he was homeschooled. Haha, replied the boy and immediately wailed loudly. They killed me. He slapped his hand on the keyboard in frustration. You interrupted the offender, said James. The The woman looked sadly and reproachfully at her son. He looked down guiltily and calmed down. She moved the plate to her son. "Eat, or it'll get cold. Now I have to go to the bathroom." The boy reached for his crutches, trying not to touch anything on the table. While still very young, James had suffered a severe injury. He broke his femoral neck while bicycling. It took the boy a long time to recover. His entire childhood was spent in the walls of all kinds of hospitals, but unfortunately, the femur fused incorrectly, depriving the child of the ability to move independently. James needed an expensive operation, and for the last few years, the family tried to save the necessary amount of money for it. But the money was saved with great difficulty. The father of the family at some point became drunk, and Nancy's salary was not enough even for the normal maintenance of the whole family. What was there to save? Nancy had a strong feeling that with each passing day, the chances of making James undergo an operation were getting farther and farther away. After all, it was impossible to save up, and there was no opportunity to have such an operation free of charge. Nancy held out her hand to her son. "Let me help you." Did the boy accept? No, I clumsily got up on crutches and left the room. Nancy took a moment to look around again. After all, this was the room James shared with Kevin. She ran her eyes over the table, ran her hand over her eldest son's bed, squatted down, and looked under the bed. A small package caught her eye. The woman took it out and unwrapped it. It was a tiny black woman's purse. I think they called it a stool. Nancy jabbed painfully. A horrible guess. The son of a thief. Not that she dumped the contents directly onto the floor. In the bag were a few crumpled bills and some sort of bag of white powder. The woman only let out a quiet gasp. It was undoubtedly drugs. She angrily stuffed the entire contents of the bag back in, opened the window, and what was the point of tossing the find into the distance? That's when her youngest son came back into the room. He, noticing the change in his mother's mood, cautiously inquired, "Mom, why me?" Nancy's eyes went black. She slowly settled down on the table. "James, have you noticed something strange in Vanya's behavior?" the woman asked the teenager. The boy visibly changed, frowned, turned his face away. I'm hungry, he said quickly. "Let's go to the kitchen." Nancy covered her face with her hand and spoke in a weak voice. "No, Daddy's asleep. Let's go here." The next morning began rather unusually. For the first time in a long time, Nancy was not in a hurry to go to work. She woke up to bright sunlight, as usual, around 6 o'clock, a perennial habit, and made her way to the bathroom. Washed herself cursorily, trying not to look at the cracked sink and the affected condensation-covered pipes. The sight of his own bathroom caused Nancy nothing but disgust. Since it itched, she put on an old robe, yawning. The woman went out into the kitchen. The husband was still asleep. It seemed he hadn't even changed his posture since last night. Nancy gingerly approached her spouse, touched the pulse on his neck. Alive! It went through her head, and the woman exhaled with relief. She took in a breath of air and said firmly to Frank, "Frank, get up," and shook her husband by the shoulder. The man jerked, raised his head, and finally his eyes became conscious. "Why are you yelling?" "Oh," Frank gently touched Sands for water. "Pour it yourself." Nancy pressed her lips together. "What is it this time? What's up with your job? I almost got fired. You're gonna have to support your family." "Fired how?" Frank was genuinely surprised. "And how are we going to live before we're fired?" Nancy grumbled unhappily. "I'm telling you almost. Are you even listening to me?" She rolled her eyes. "God, what a jerk. What's going on with your job?" "I repeat, with work." He was thinking. It was like he was remembering something that happened a long time ago, when in fact he had the job yesterday. "So I got fired, that's what. And you, of course, not your fault," ironically muttered the woman. At this moment she was pouring boiling water over instant coffee in the couch. "And bad from this cup is not my fault." Frank did not understand the sarcasm. "Well, drank a shot in the morning to avoid a headache. That's all. And who are they? The bosses? Who else? They've dealt with it, fired someone, even if they didn't understand the situation." "Fucking Frank, what What's there to deal with? You can't drink in the workplace. She got angry and put the mud on the table. Dark brown liquor spilled out, staining everything around her. I know you're shot. Bottle minimum. Fucking alcoholic. She wrinkled her nose. Frank looked out the window, still unable to get up from his seat. Fucking hell. The man repeated after his wife. That's right. He slapped his forehead loudly, then grimaced at the pain in his temples. Mother will be here soon. I completely forgot to tell you what. Nancy wondered. She looked at her husband questioningly, raising her mug. Your mother. What else would she be? She called about a week ago, saying she was coming to visit us soon. I almost completely forgot to warn you. He smiled indignantly. Well, pour some water. Fuck you, shouted the woman. We don't need your mother, we have enough problems without her. She rushed around the room, spilling you the remaining coffee. Tell me where are we gonna put her? We don't even have a bed for her. I'll think of something, Frank said hesitantly. You better think of a job. The woman snapped at him. The conversation between the couple was interrupted by their youngest son. What are you doing, Peter? I can't listen to this. The boy looked frightened, pleased. Nancy was pointing his finger at his husband. Scared the kid. No, tell me, are you happy? Mom, you started it. James stood in the kitchen doorway, leaning on his crutches and trembling hands shakily supporting him, swaying from side to side. Sorry, son, just your daddy. Nancy took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. Come, eat your porridge and let's go for a walk. You need some fresh air. Do you? She shifted her gaze to her husband. Look for a job immediately. The woman walked, embarrassed, past her son, out of the kitchen. The boy followed her. I'll find one, enthusiastically said Frank, left in the room completely alone. Having finished their walk, Nancy and James returned home, dragging the teenager, along with his crutches, into the entryway was completely inconvenient. And the woman once again spoke unkindly of her husband. Your father should have come down to help us, resented Nancy, puffing, lifting her son up the stairs. Mammy, but you asked him to? Suggested the son. And now? Can't he figure it out for himself? Nancy continued to grumble. Okay, we're almost home. They finally got up, entered the apartment, and stood like a stumbling block. Straight from the kitchen came the chiming and cheerful voice of Nancy and her mother-in-law. Not again, quietly whispered Nancy. Mama, Grandma? James asked. He looked questioningly at his mother. It looks that way, son. Of course, James had seen his father's mother before. It was just that it had been so long ago that he hardly remembered her at all, and the teenager has only ghostly, fragmentary memories of his grandmother. How, even before his injury, he had been running and jumping merrily across the green lawn and being a visitor to her in the village. Nancy, on the other hand, of course, remembered her mother-in-law very well. Once before the birth of their eldest son, the newlyweds had lived in this very village with Frank's parents. Then they bought an apartment in the mortgage, moved to the city, and communication with her mother-in-law almost came to naught. With her mother-in-law, Nancy called rarely, only on holidays. She never listened to what Frank's mother tried to advise, only answered on duty, clasping the phone receiver between her shoulder and ear. Yes, of course she did. Frank, on the other hand, had been in contact with his parents more often since his father's death. He began to visit his mother occasionally in the village, helping out with the household chores. The eldest son, Kevin, remembered his grandmother well, but he probably didn't care about her. Family ties, for some unknowable reason, were not particularly meaningful in Nancy and family. And helping her son do the same. Nancy tried to pull herself together. She inhaled deeply and exhaled several times, gritted through her teeth. Honey, go say hi to Grandma. And after the teen obediently pointed toward the kitchen, the woman stealthily skipped into the bathroom, quickly washed her hands. Half water and tired face ran a comb through her hair. She opened her eyes wide a couple of times, trying to control the painful sensations, and firmly told herself to calm down, looked at her reflection once again, and giving herself a promise not to say anything rude to her mother-in-law, even accidentally, entered the kitchen with everyone else. Clara, am I glad to see you? Nancy smiled and lied to her mother-in-law directly into her eyes. The mother-in-law smiled widely. She was already sitting upright in her favorite chair in a masterly manner. Nancy thundered from the bread from the biggest cup she found in the house. The tea quickly assured, in bags long, rustling skirt seemed to take up all the surrounding space. "Nancy, darling." "Hi. Hi." The woman gestured with her arms spread wide, urging Nancy to come over and hug immediately. Reluctantly, Nancy approached and hugged the seated sailor, her immediately fiber a rather pleasant smell. Her mother-in-law smelled a complex range of scents that guessed leftover milk black currant and something else sort of herbal. Nancy smiled involuntarily for a moment, back to the distant countryside of her youth. "Do you realize that my grandson doesn't remember me at all?" I had to reacquaint myself with my own grandson. Clara laughed good-naturedly. "Where is the eldest? Where's Kevin?" Nancy was embarrassed. She turned away and began to wash the dishes. Out, she finally got it out. "How long will you be staying with us, Mom?" In a deliberately careless way, Nancy asked. "That's I don't know yet. It's hard to say." "Well, Frank, get my bag. I've brought you some goodies." Grandma smiled and clapped her hands loudly. Nancy and her son shuddered at the same time. The woman seemed to be thinking to herself, "Lord, she's so loud." Frank had already obediently brought a huge wheeled bag into the kitchen, from which Clara began to take out some jars and whistles. That's how her mother-in-law listed everything that was extracted from the vast depths of her swamp. "Here are strawberries, and this is from black currants. Milk, fresh bread." She sighed noisily at the smell of bread, lifted it close to her nose, and laughed loudly. "All about her own, I beg to differ. Yep, and this one we have goat." As Clara continued to pull more and more groceries out of the bag, Nancy bore a stern look from her husband. He caught her judgmental gaze and shrugged guiltily, saying, "I had nothing to do with it." James flapped his eyes in surprise. "Grandmother, why did you bring all these groceries? Did they pass the required health inspection?" The grandmother laughed even louder than the usual grandson. "That's what it means to spoil a child, the city and computers. Look, don't you give me any other checks." "I told you fresh." The loud voice of the mother-in-law clearly bounced off the walls. "That kind of ping-pong ball." She laughed. She said, "Well, grandson, don't talk like an old grandfather to your mom." But look how Frank jumped, but quickly regained a serious expression under the stern look of his wife. Nancy mumbled, "Excuse me, I have to go," and stormed out of the kitchen. Running to the bedroom, she slammed the door loudly behind her, went to the window, and stared at the tree branches sticking out in different directions. Her mind was spinning. Why? Why did you come here? Nancy beat her hands against the windowsill with force. It couldn't be said that Nancy hated her mother-in-law. Rather, the woman simply couldn't understand or accept her. It seemed to her that Clara was too boisterous, too frivolous, and in some ways uninspired by her mother-in-law's rustic lifestyle. And her household inclinations were also incomprehensible to her. What the hell is poplar milk? She thought irritably. What if there is some kind of E. coli in it? And who's going to drink it? It will stay in the refrigerator. We'll throw out all these jokes of my mother-in-law. Her inappropriate laughter, straightforwardness, bordering on tactlessness in Nancy's view, and overly noisy voice caused the landlady only irritation. She was tired of Clara. Even during a 5-minute conversation on the phone, she could not even think of living with her again under the same roof. Gradually, Nancy calmed down a little, walked across the room, and flopped down face down on the bed. She thought it unlikely that her dear mother-in-law would deign to add some money to the family budget and feed her at her own expense. She quietly weighed bent with indignation, ducking her face into the pillow. At that moment, there was a loud knock on the door. Without waiting for permission to enter, Clara burst into the bedroom with a brisk step, looked around, and said in a loud voice, "What's up with her, Nancy?" "Nothing," in confidence. And again she laughed disgustedly. Nancy sat down on the bed, lost her face with her hands. Of course, in confidence, nothing. She smiled languidly. She could not tell her mother-in-law of her displeasure. She was raised to respect her elders. "No offense to me, honey, but you look a little too tired and panic-stricken. Maybe you should take a vacation. Nancy was indignant to the core. She was silent for a few seconds, trying to swallow her resentment, and then she exhaled and said quietly to Clara, "Darling, but where will I go? Who will I leave the whole household to?" "Who? Me, of course." The mother-in-law patted her daughter-in-law cheerfully on the shoulder. "Nancy was surprised at you." "No, not at all. It's not worth it for my sake to stay longer than you planned, especially since I'm on vacation as of today." My mother-in-law smiled. "It's true. What a lucky coincidence for you. Vacation is very, very important. Why were you sitting at home then?" Nancy started to explain that the vacation was not planned. Suddenly, she heard the front door open. She cried out Kevin and ran to meet her son. Clara, surprised by this reaction, followed her. "Kevin, where have you been? Why haven't you been home?" Nancy began to reprimand her son. The boy didn't even look at his mother. Then his grandmother came out of the room. She shouted happily to her grandson, "Kevin, what a grown-up you have become. What a handsome man." And the grandmother, without even letting Vanya change his shoes, came to him with hugs. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" Unhappily kicked the teenager. He reluctantly embraced Clara and in the next minute already disappeared behind the doors of his room. The women looked at each other. Nancy ran after her son. She stepped confidently into the room, and before she could open her mouth, she saw Kevin rummaging under his bed. The woman flashed a glare. "What are you looking for by any chance? A black purse? Where did you get it?" Kevin wanted to answer, but Nancy interrupted him. "You stole it. Come on." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. Her voice broke into a scream. "More drugs. Kevin, shame on you. Think about your father and me." Clara appeared in the doorway and gasped and clutched at her heart. When she heard the screams, Frank and James came in as well. There was a tense silence in the room. Kevin, without saying a word, explained the relatives and left the apartment in a flash. Nancy, wiping away her tears, looked helplessly at her family. The first to raise her voice was Nancy's mother-in-law. "Oh my God, you're sure I'm sorry." Nancy, I myself didn't understand exactly what she was apologizing for. She ran her hand through her hair, returned her voice to its usual calm. Then James, "Let's go outside. Honey, let's take another walk." She walked out of her children's room. Her youngest son stood up on his crutches and obediently dragged himself after her. The next week passed relatively quietly. The in-laws made their beds in the kitchen, laying out the old and already well-worn couch. Kevin still made occasional appearances at home. He didn't say anything or explain anything. He looked okay, but he mostly dropped by to spend the night or to get something to eat. Nancy was at home most of the time because of her forced vacation. She didn't really have anywhere to go. No reason to, the woman thought. All her vacation consisted in walking with her invalid son. After all, he needs to be outdoors as often as possible, to walk, to develop his hips. Life with Clara seemed unbearable for Nancy. She was fed up with her left-handed mother-in-law, nagging her daughter-in-law time and time again, receiving her as if she were a 20-year-old girl again. She taught Nancy how to do the dishes, taught her how to cook, taught her how to clean. One fine morning, she even stormed into the bathroom and pointed out to Nancy that she wasn't brushing her teeth properly. The woman was filled with anger. How ridiculous of the old woman to teach me, she thought to herself. Nancy said patiently out loud, "Thank you for the tip." What annoyed her most of all was not even the mother-in-law's moralizing, but the look with which she presented it. The opposite side of the dance, eternally loudly ready, all her reproaches served under the guise of touching care. Nancy was getting sick of such hypocrisy. However, on proper reflection, she herself was to some extent hypocritical. Instead of expressing her displeasure to her relative, she smiled good-naturedly at her face and nodded, agreeing with every word she said. Frank went on a bender again and disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he devoted all his time to eating, sleeping, and watching television. But Nancy gave him credit. Her husband, when necessary, stood up for his wife, gently putting his mother in her place. "Mother, really? Nancy will teach her how to be a snot, Frank said. The sons, for their part, were as displeased with their grandmother as their mother. Once in a while, Kevin would come home and find their grandmother in the kitchen, humming loudly, and the pies in the big frying pan were smoky and smelled unbearable. It was burning with oil. True, the pies came out delicious. James was extremely dissatisfied with the fact that his grandmother constantly tried to deprive him of computer games. "Grandson, why don't you read a book?" she'd tell him. James only waved it away irritably. He was more interested in playing a shooter game. Once he said to his grandmother, "You don't understand, but at least in the game I can run." After this phrase, Clara, as it was hushed thought, and left his youngest grandson alone. Time went on its way. The fragile white apple blossoms fell, and summer came. Nancy dreamed of only one thing, that her mother-in-law would leave as soon as possible one warm summer evening. The woman sat at the table in her kitchen, absent-mindedly watching some TV show and watching the soup simmering on the stove. The mother-in-law came into the kitchen on an empty stomach. "Who cooks like that?" Sitting there like an urn on the spot. She laughed at her dainty joke. "Go ahead and get some rest. I'm talking to you." And then off to the side. Nancy to herself forth the news, and aloud said Clara, "I'm dreadfully tired. I've only just sat down at all. You're not taking care of yourself. Go, I say rest. I'm on you. I'm cooking." Nancy exhaled heavily and was tired of her mother-in-law trying to smoke her out of the kitchen. She chose her words carefully and quietly said, "Why are you always trying to get me out of the kitchen?" Clara opened her mouth, pulled out astonished, but did not have time to answer because Frank entered the kitchen. "Good evening, ladies." The man was neatly shaved. He smelled surprisingly pleasant. He seemed to be completely sober. "Frank, is that you?" Nancy theatrically carried the palm card. "That the drink is over. How long until the next one?" Nancy chuckled quietly into her fist. Frank was embarrassed, hushed, looked at his mom, searching her eyes for support. Then, in a cheerful tone, he said, "I'm going on a business trip. I'm leaving Nancy for Washington." He fixed the edge of his t-shirt. "I wish I could feel a little encouragement from my own wife." Did Nancy, laughing, shake her head? "What's next, Frank? You'll be back in a week, and you'll drink all the money you've earned. If they pay you back, of course, and I'll have to pay your way. We've been there." Clara, watching the couple arguing, "Frank, I'm very happy for you. You're going to the capital. You really should say something nice." There you go, picking up on your mother's words. A man learned from his mother how to behave with his husband. Nancy went into a frenzy. It flashed through my mind. "So live with your mom." Out loud, the woman said, "As usual, good luck, Frank." She went to the stove, turned off the burners, and silently left the kitchen. First, the forced Nancy of the new vacation of the fallen. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since her mother-in-law's arrival. Nancy was already boiling like a hot single kettle. Clara had already driven her completely crazy with her presence. Kevin still came home occasionally. Only now he was harassing his mother. "Well, when Grandma's going to leave?" The teenager kept repeating. James was expectedly not happy either. Frank was the only one who was walking around in high spirits, preparing for his imminent departure to Washington. On another Monday, Nancy, after doing all the housework and taking a walk with her youngest son, got ready and headed to work by 1 o'clock. She ventured out for the first time in a long time to put on some makeup, let her hair down and lightly bobbed. And all to show the bosses, "I've had a 100% rest." Nancy hoped George would take pity on her and allow her to resume her duties. She'd given the dentist advance notice. The woman arrived at the clinic. She knocked. She entered the office. "George, hello. How are you here without me?" Vacation assistant did not smile in the whole mouth, demonstrating her excellent health. The stern-looking doctor sat behind a wide, perfectly white desk. He raised his head, tearing his gaze away from the papers. "Ah, Nancy, hello, hello, hello. Come in, sit down." The woman obediently sat down. The smile continued to shine on her thin lips. The muscles of her face were almost cramped with excitement. Without waiting for the doctor's rejoinder, she gently asked, "So, George, when can I start work?" The dentist frowned and looked at his assistant carefully. He slid his gaze over her face, and it made Nancy feel even more uncomfortable. Finally, he asked, "How was your rest?" "Fine." Nancy nodded cheerfully. "I feel great. Thanks for the vacation. And where were you?" Nancy hesitated and quietly replied, "Home." The doctor shook his head reproachfully. "Nancy, I didn't just send you on vacation for nothing. You were supposed to be resting, recovering. And you're what?" He adjusted his glasses, touching the frames. "You look even more tired." Honestly, the woman was embarrassed. The smile disappeared of its own accord. George continued, "No makeup will help. I can see your condition. Nancy, you're tired as hell. I realize my son is sick, but that's no reason to beat yourself up like this." He got up from his chair. He stepped closer to the assistant, leaned against the edge of the desk. "You realize that your chronic fatigue affects not only you, but also those around you. It affects our patients first and foremost." He stood up and walked around the office with his hands behind his back. "I'll tell you something else, not as your immediate superior, but as a friend. Your chronic fatigue is taking its toll on your family. Think about what I'm saying. In the meantime, I can't allow you to assume your duties. Get some rest. Better yet, go somewhere for at least a week." Nancy was getting very angry. "I thought to myself, what the hell am I going anywhere for? You're so clever," she said out loud. "Swallow your resentment and anger again." "All right, I did." She got up heavy, brushed off a non-existent dust from her clothes, glanced at the doctor. "When can I start working?" "When you realize you've rested, slept, cleaned up. You'll know when that happens." He looked at her closely again. "Doesn't make me fire you. Go on. Goodbye, George. Have a nice vacation." Disappointed, panic-stricken, and even humiliated, Nancy once again walked home along the familiar road. Money was running out in spite of her austerity. "I'll have to borrow again," Nancy thought. "And we haven't paid off our previous debts yet." She could hear the cheerful and happy voices every now and then. People around her were laughing and talking animatedly, enjoying the good weather. Some woman exclaimed, "Look, Andrew, what flowers do you see? They weren't here before." Nancy unconsciously threw a dissatisfied glance at the flower, which the stranger admired. The flower was indeed excellent, except that Nancy had absolutely nothing to do with it. All her thoughts were preoccupied with problems, difficulties with the work of her son's upcoming surgery, which it seemed they would never do. Not seeing anything around from the tears that had returned to her eyes, she herself did not notice how she came to her house. Her husband had left on his business trip as early as the morning before, leaving Nancy alone with her problems, just as he always did. Only now her mother-in-law was added to them. To make it easy for her, she never even bothered to explain why she brought it from her village. The woman stopped at the front door and hesitated. She didn't feel like going home at all. She knew that as soon as she crossed the threshold of her own house, her mother-in-law would immediately start harassing her. Slowly, she decided to enter the apartment quietly, unnoticed, so that she would not immediately realize that her daughter-in-law had already returned. Nancy quietly opened the front door, changed her shoes, and began to rejoice in her son's room. Her goal was almost accomplished as suddenly something in her mother-in-law's voice carried all the way from the kitchen. It caught her attention. She went back to the kitchen door lurking and listened. The mother-in-law was talking loudly to someone on the phone, giving her a loud chagrin every now and then. Nancy rolled her eyes but continued to eavesdrop. Oh yes, of course, Clara was laughing loudly into the receiver of her cell phone. There wasn't much time left. Nancy nestled even closer to the door, just a little more, and she would run out herself, losing her slippers. The old woman was talking even louder than usual. Nancy noted sarcastically to herself that she thought it would make the connection better if she yelled. Suddenly Clara said something that made the landlady's mouth dry and almost stopped her heart. "We'll be rid of our Nancy soon enough." There was another rude, loud cackle. Nancy stood frozen in place like a stooped man. Her lips were quivering with resentment and anger. Her whole body was covered with cold. Then the woman shook. Who is this old woman talking to? Could it be to Frank? fearful speculation. Kevin thrust into her heart like sharp knives. Frank, how could you? Nancy was on the verge of hysterics. She had already stopped listening to her mother-in-law's phone chatter. She hadn't noticed when she ended the conversation. Shocked by what she had heard, the unfortunate tried to pull herself together to take away the trembling in her knees. She squared her shoulders as best she could. She took a deep breath and with a confident jerk opened the door leading to the kitchen. Explain yourself at once. Took the bull by the horns. Nancy, I heard who you were talking to. Clara jumped in Nancy's seat in surprise. Why do you have to be so scary? Am I that annoying to you? Are you trying to give me a heart attack? Clara laughed nervously, but she didn't look the way a person should look after so many days on the scene. Still just as carefree relaxed. Nancy for a moment even marveled and perhaps envied the appearance of composure and equanimity in her mother-in-law. This woman, even without knowing her vivacious, cheerful character, could in no way be called an old woman. And even an elderly, ruddy, riding, healthy face almost wrinkle-free. So fine mesh around the eyes figure is still okay. Strong on the mannequin, of course, does not pull. Nancy noted to herself with a chuckle. But you can't call her a pillow either. Even the gray hair is almost imperceptible in the dark, shiny hair. What does she wash it with? Nancy thought absent-mindedly, and immediately remembered her mother-in-law's countless instructions about milk masks and nettles. And the bandages in them, apparently there is some good in it after all. She shook herself out of her non-local reverie, which was surely nothing more than a side effect of the shock she had just suffered. Nancy was shaking his head violently. Explain yourself. She repeated her demand more like an order. Out of breath, she stood in the middle of the kitchen, breathing heavily and clenching her hands into fists. Honey, what exactly did you hear? I don't understand. You'll have to forgive me, old woman. Nancy rolled her eyes. Don't pretend. I just heard you say you were going to get rid of Nancy soon. Who were you talking to? The mother-in-law chuckled nastily and said Nancy's sister-in-law's name in a long voice. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. You should definitely take a vacation, get some rest. You're dreaming up such passions. Who do you think I've been discussing such horrors with here? You were on the phone and stopped this circus. Nancy gestured angrily at the phone. It was lying next to its owner on the kitchen table. Clara clutched her head demonstratively. Poor girl. She picked up her glasses, hanging around her neck, pierced through a string. Put them on, picked up her old cot and her cell phone. Look, the last call I got was yesterday when I called my neighbor's place. What's wrong? You imagined it? The woman took her mother-in-law's phone in her hands. She looked, and indeed, the last outgoing call was yesterday morning. She returned the phone and thought. She wouldn't have had time to delete the call so quickly in the log. I just walked in out of the blue. And Clara kept broadcasting. How tired are you? My girl, how tired you are, poor little craftsman. Hurry up and get some rest. I'll cook everything myself and feed James. Nancy thought about it, helped, opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water from drinking directly from the neck, and quietly said, I don't believe you. You're always trying to send me away. Clara, but this is my home, and I'm not going anywhere, no matter how much you want me to. Do you have any idea how we live? I'm the only thing that keeps this place going. Don't you see how your son provides for his family? We've been trying to save up for James' surgery for over 4 years, and it's all for nothing. And Kevin? Nancy waved her hand. Her lips trembled, her cheeks flamed. She was about to have a real tantrum. Her mother-in-law got up from the sofa and, making soothing gestures with her hands, came up to her daughter-in-law and took her by the hands, despite her resistance. I'm telling you, it seemed. She said the last word loudly in syllables. Calm down, please. I'm telling you now, I'm telling you herbs useful. That again at work problems. Her voice sounded sympathetic and almost normal, without the usual naive cheerfulness of the topic translates. He's a bitch, Nancy thought, pulled away from her and a little slower, replied, I've extended my vacation. So you see. The mother-in-law clapped Nancy on the back with her hand, and she jumped in surprise. Clara spoke quickly, in her usual tone of voice. I've been telling you for years, you need a change of scenery. Your boss thinks so too. You can tell you're a smart man. Doctors aren't stupid. She sighed. That's it, go, dear. Don't bother me. Go and rest. Nancy threw her mother-in-law a suspicious look and silently walked out of the kitchen. The phrase she had heard a few minutes ago did not leave her mind. We'll be rid of our Nancy soon enough. Who the hell was she talking to? Why her? Does someone need to get rid of Nancy? Or is she really going crazy already? The woman went to her youngest son, did the usual things, moved around the room, asked mundane questions like how the boy was feeling, then cautiously began to question her son on a topic of interest. James, tell me, how do you like your grandmother? The boy set a disgruntled face. And here, and you do not know. I'm fed up with it. He looked around, lowered his voice. Why did she even come here? How much longer is she going to be here? She didn't say, Nancy answered. And then she wondered. Really, how much longer would she have to put up with her? James continued to resent her. He's lucky Pav's gone. I wish we could go somewhere else. What if she's here for good? The boy asked fearfully. Nancy frowned. I don't think so, darling. We'll try to find out tomorrow. The morning did not go well. All night Nancy tossed and turned, trying to get into a comfortable position and finally fall asleep. Sometimes the woman succeeded, but she slept. She was restless, constantly waking up for 30 or 40 minutes at a time. From the head never went away. Obedient conversation of the mother-in-law. Or maybe it really did show. Every time Nancy managed to sleep, after a while she woke up from nightmares. She dreamed of being kicked out of her home, of wandering the streets of the city like some kind of defense. Her mother-in-law laughing nastily at her. Get rid of Nancy. The woman kept repeating that phrase to herself. She couldn't understand what she had done to her husband's mother. She got up tired, lethargic. As her mind took in looking at herself in the mirror, it seemed to her that the dark circles under her eyes had gotten even darker. Even more so, she couldn't look at her reflection for more than 10 seconds. Finishing her morning routine, she walked to the kitchen. Her mother-in-law, already awake, was running briskly from the stove to the refrigerator, cooking something and humming at the top of her lungs. Good morning, Clara. Nancy, you're a man, smiled, pressed the kettle button. Good morning, Nancy. Oh, the mother-in-law had a look of shock on her face. What was she pointing at Nancy's face? What? Where? Nancy twisted in one place, ran her hand over her face, ran into the bathroom to the mirror. She yelled right from there. Clara, what is it? I don't see anything. Her mother-in-law unceremoniously followed her into the bathroom. How can't you see the writing? You look like you've been tortured all night. She frowned and folded her arms across her chest, waddling past the bathroom. James threw a sullen glance in his mother's direction. Thank you for noticing, Nancy said modestly and returned to the kitchen. She was tired of the constant insults from her mother-in-law, but she still didn't have the nurture to respond in the same manner. She poured instant coffee into a cup. The mother-in-law was alarmed. Who does that? Take a spoonful straight from the jar. Nancy closed her eyes. She counted to 3 and took a deep breath. Honey, how long are you staying with us? May I ask you for what purpose you have come? The mother-in-law laughed. She walked over and snatched the boiling kettle out of her daughter-in-law's hands. I'd better pour it. You're certainly now spread out. She carefully poured boiling water into the cup, and then finally answered, I didn't just come here. I was called to your city church. They have a bishop's wife, seriously ill. I came to help. And you're all so tactful, so cautious. Why? Can't you see that I'm out every day until evening? What do you want to ask me where to? She was silent. She stirred a little and spooned her tea and sighed. For how long? It's hard to say. But I'll be with you for at least 6 months. There was a rumble and a loud creak. Hearing my mother-in-law's words, Nancy dropped the cup with hot coffee from his hands right on his lap. The mother-in-law immediately raised a shout. How come, Nancy, how come? She was rushing around the kitchen, looking for something to wipe up the spillage of the sticky drink. Nancy herself only repetitively repeated the words of her mother-in-law of 6 months and never cleaned up the broken crumb. She walked out of the kitchen, quickly collecting James, Nancy walked out of the house with him. The boy's hip had been hurting more and more lately, so he went outside in a stroller. The woman rolled forward and thought deeply to herself, 6 months is a long time. The woman remembered overhearing the conversation and got angry. "Mom, what are you doing?" James inquired, looking up at the frowning mother from below. Nancy was silent for a long time, and then confidently answered her son. "You and I are going to leave this house. I can't stand living like this anymore." The woman swallowed the lump that came to her throat and quickly wiped a tear with her sleeve. The boy, frightened, asked where. "Where will we go, to your aunt? Do you miss Aunt Christina?" "Yes," replied James cheerfully. "We will go to her villa. We will." Nancy pulled out her cell phone, dialed her eldest son's number. Kevin didn't pick up, so she dialed again. Ringing, ringing. And then the call was dropped. She swore softly and asked the younger son, "Do you know where your brother is?" From where James answered, "Then let's go look for him," firmly said Nancy and turned the stroller the other way. Together with her youngest son, she spent several hours outside. The summer sun was shining brightly, and the wind seemed to have left their town for good. James had already started whimpering, repeating he still wouldn't want to leave with us. Let's go without him. But Nancy never gave up trying to find her eldest son. She looked in all the secluded courtyards of the city, in parallel called him on the phone. As the sun was nearing sunset, Nancy exhaled tiredly. They still hadn't found her. She texted her son saying they were leaving, and asked him to arrive as early as possible at his aunt's villa. Kevin knew exactly how to get there. After that, they returned home without saying anything to their mother-in-law. She behaved as usual, grumbling something, laughing loudly, making flat jokes. Early the next morning, having packed the necessary things, Nancy and James left their home apartment. Nancy was not a sociable person, very modest. She had never had any close friends in her whole life. Almost one, though, and that was Nancy's own sister. And not just a sister, but a twin, as well as the other twins' girls from small years were inseparable everywhere, and always they were together. All through childhood, all through adolescence, and even the very beginning of adulthood, the sisters had been almost as one. Nancy often thought about how lucky she was to have a sister, how lucky she was to come into this world not alone, but with a true friend. She knew that Sister Christina was her soulmate. However, as time went on, the sisters were no longer as close to each other as they had been in their childhood and adolescence. Adulthood put everything in its prosaic place. Nancy fell in love with her future husband at the age of 16. At 18, she was already married. Christina, on the other hand, took a different path. After high school, she entered the Faculty of Economics, and after the university immediately began to give all her time and energy to her own business. As a result, the sisters ended up on opposite sides of life. Nancy devoted herself to her family and Christina to business. It is worth noting quite successful and profitable business. Nancy arrived unannounced. She called her sister only when she and James were already standing at the gate of her large country house. There was a small and winding river running nearby, and the grounds themselves were surrounded by a thick and tall pine forest. The scent from the pine trees was magnificent. It seemed that the very air was here, especially after the bad city smog. Nancy pressed the video bell on the intercom, and in a couple of minutes the gate automatically opened, and Christina ran out to her sister. "How did I miss you?" Christina crouched down to James' stroller and hugged the boy tightly. Sis, she was coming to visit Nancy at her place. A long time ago, back when she was a baby. The sisters were constantly confused, even by their own family. Parents couldn't always tell where Christina was and where Nancy was. But things were different now. Nancy herself knew that she looked aged and tired, and even sickly. But she had never realized until today that she had been so frozen in place while her sister was happily counting something. She watched Christina. She was a young, undeniably beautiful woman, thick, short, light russet hair glistening in the sunlight. The bright sparkle of beautiful eyes, smooth, clear skin, straight posture, and perfectly tailored clothes confounded Nancy. She herself suddenly doubted that this beauty was her twin sister. Christina was dressed in loose beige slacks, a pull-back white tank top, emphasized a good figure, and thrown on top of a short and large knitted beige poncho. Added to the woman some special charm of Christina smelled good perfume with a floral bright fragrance. Nancy managed to recognize the smell of lilies along with the scent of sunny fresh peach. She discerned beautiful gold earrings in the shape of little swallows on her sister. Nancy shivered in embarrassment. Coughing into her fist, she said, "You look great, sis, just gorgeous." Christina smiled softly, stood behind the stroller, and rolled James onto the lawn. Nodding to her sister in the direction of the house, she walked forward. "Thank you, Nancy. What happened in there? You look so tired." The woman sighed heavily. I'm exhausted. The house is a mess. Frank's a heavy drinker. It's nothing new, but my mother-in-law has moved in." Christina wondered how she moved in. "Why'd you call her?" "That's the thing. No one called her. She arrived, unannounced, you might say." James jumped into the conversation. Grandmother had come to the church to help some woman. "We have to," Nancy nodded. "Our local priest's wife was sick, and she'd come to help her." Nancy chuckled. "Why didn't the priest put her up in his house?" "I wonder." Christina, an unbearable woman, stopped the stroller with her nephew and suddenly summarized. "But she seems to be kind." Nancy, noting to herself that Christina understood nothing and knew nothing, looked around the house. It was a large wooden building with a flat roof, made in the style of high-tech. Wide panoramic windows glistened with cleanliness, neat. Lush pine trees grew along the edges of the house. Of course, the woman had been to her sister's villa before. Now, however, she was visited by a slightly gloomy flying head. Like that genetic feeling, Nancy suddenly realized that she was terribly jealous of her own sister. The sisters were sitting in the large, beautiful living room. They were seated on opposite sides of a long white sofa. In front of it was a large fireplace with a long glass coffee table between the fireplace and the sofa. On it stood 2 pretty mugs and words of new tea. Christina reached for hers and took a sip, surprised to find herself holding it out. "Yeah, well, that's what she said. I don't believe it." She looked at her sister skeptically. "No, I've definitely heard that phrase." "That's what she said, that she wanted to get rid of Nancy." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Well, there's no way that could have happened. No way. Look, maybe she was talking about some other Nancy. And you should have found out right away, told her to her face." Nancy smiled sadly. "Don't be ridiculous. It was definitely about me. And there was no point in finding out about her. I tried, I tell you, but it got me nowhere." She picked up her cup of tea, twirled it in her hands. "What's all this for?" "Alki husband, mother-in-law, mom. And the children?" Well, prevailing stretched the sister. "But what kind of sons do you have?" "I have none, as you know." Christina sighed softly and looked sadly at the flames. "And we'll get James back on his feet very soon. I decided that I would give you money for the operation," she added suddenly. "I'm exhausted. No more watching the child suffer." Nancy quickly slammed his eyes shut, trying to chase the tears from the corners of his eyes. She opened her mouth to reply, but couldn't get a word out. Instead, she burst into violent tears, covering her face with her hands. The nurse moved closer, put her arms around Nancy, and quietly asked what was wrong. Little Nancy answered through her tears. "Everything all at once. There is not a penny of money at all. Frank is drinking away everything he earns, if you can even call it money, and I've been suspended from work. I've been home for 3 weeks on my own dime. I'm in debt like a silk. Christina and Kevin's mine." "Ah, what? I thought he was fine." Nancy burst into tears again. "My Kevin, he's a drug addict." Christina looked at her sister in shock. She couldn't believe her ears. The eldest of her nephews, the woman had always considered a strong, healthy, young guy, an athlete, handsome. And here was such news. Christina was simply speechless. Continuing to clutch her poor sister to her chest, Nancy spent the rest of the day in tears. She tried to pull herself together and didn't want her youngest son to see her in such a state. But it was all in vain. The tears themselves poured from her eyes in hail. Nancy saw how well her sister lived and did not understand what she was doing wrong. She looked sadly at the expensive interior, at her sister's chic appearance, and was torn to pieces. On the one hand, Nancy was happy for her, but on the other, she was pained to realize that her sister's life had turned out much better than her own. The next few days passed relatively quietly. Nancy took many walks with her son, breathing fresh air. She even went mushroom picking a couple times. She realized that she felt much better here than she did at home. With every breath she took, she became calmer, and the peace of mind that came with the change of scenery somehow faded into the background. After a few days, Nancy was ready to go back, but her sister insisted that both she and her youngest son stay with her in the country, and they did. Nancy continued to call her oldest son from time to time, but he was reluctant to answer his mother. Only once wrote, "Mama, I'm fine, don't call again." One day, the woman sellers about another failed conversation with her son and decided to leave Kevin alone. What can I do? Bitter, Nancy asked herself. Her heart was heavy, but she really didn't know what to do. It was an early, hot, sunny morning. James was feeling much better and expressed a desire to walk on crutches to the river. Nancy, along with her son, set out for the walk. They walked quietly along a narrow woodland path leading straight to a small local beach. They walked past tall pine trees, past other people's houses. Every now and then they bumped into large stones and protruding from the sandy pathway studded and amber pine bark, yellow-green color of the pine forest. It was pleasing to the eye, soothing and filling with some unknown feeling. It was so serene here, birds hovered around. James would occasionally stop to point out to his mother a large fly agaric or blueberry bush. "Mom, look," the boy enriched himself on one of his crutches. With the other he poked in the direction of the berries. The woman stepped closer and plucked a handful of fresh blueberries. She handed the berries to her son and watched with pleasure as James flew them. The boy said dreamily, "I wish I could run down and pick them myself, and you could bring me berries and I'd turn my mother away." Tears came to her eyes again. She exhaled, answering son so and so. "Son, you'll see." They moved on. Nancy felt sad. She realized that she could not just take from her sister such a huge sum of money needed for the operation. What was she going to pay back with? Nancy walked slowly and kept wondering why the Lord had sent her such a punishment. When and with what she had managed to anger him so much. The fresh, damp smell of water hit her nose, smelling of wet wood and seaweed. With each step, it became easier to breathe, and little by little she began to feel dizzy. Nancy stopped and squinted. In the distance, the very beach could already be seen. The watery, greenish jubilant in the sunlight smoothness mingled near the horizon with the bright blue sky. The woman sighed and said happily, "Here we are at last." James wanted to clap his hands with joy, but he couldn't let go of his crutches. They walked out onto the empty, sun-drenched beach. The warm morning rays gently touched their skin. Somewhere in the distance, a small house rose up, and signs said that they could rent a boat there. Seagulls were flying around, and if you looked closely at the water, you could see a strong river current. James looked around happily and said, "Look, we're all alone out here." "Cool," he pointed toward the water, coming closer and closer. "Mommy, come here." Nancy jumped up, ran after the boy. "Careful," he laughed back. "It's all right." He stopped by the water and turned his nose. Turned his head and looked closely at his mommy. "Maybe you were swimming. It's so hot outside." "No way." The woman shook her head negatively. "Look at the current. You won't be able to stay on the water. I will." The boy shouted angrily. "Relax, you'll be all right by now. If anything, you'll catch me." The woman approached and grabbed her son's hand. He swung awkwardly to the side. She said sternly, "Don't even think about it." "What if I don't succeed?" "You've washed that one out, haven't you?" Everyone went back to the house. James frowned. He shouted angrily, "You always ruin everything." Nancy was taken aback. She slammed her eyes shut and quietly with bitterness in her voice. "I asked, spoiling things." The son didn't answer sullenly, staring into the sand. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to something behind Nancy's back. Following her son's gaze, she turned sharply in their direction. There was a man moving along the path. Judging by the figure, it was a man. Nancy shifted her gaze back to her son. Ask the man what an idiot you are. Why are you looking at him like that? Mom, let's ask him to help back me up during the swim. James asked with hope in his voice. The woman answered before she could even hear her son's arguments. No. What are you saying? What if he's some kind of maniac? Or just a man who has no time for us? We will not talk to strangers. There's no chance of that. She nodded toward the woods. Let's go home, son. We have a long walk. The boy mouthed forward disappointedly. Always you are so afraid of everything and run around. And we walk grudgingly, he said. Half an hour later, they returned home. Sis, good morning. How was your walk? Sister sat down next to Nancy. Oh, don't even ask, Nancy exclaimed. James is growing up and is beginning to show me his character. That's how Christina frowned. Scoot closer. Nancy told her sister about their morning walk and dialogue on the beach. Christina, well, how can I explain to him that I myself would like to swim and would like him to take a dip? But what? What can I do? With sadness in her voice, the woman said. She bent her arm at the elbow and cocked her head. It's not even my fault, really. Christina listened attentively to her sister as well. She got up, took a pear from her plate, twirled it in her hand, and asked Nancy thoughtfully, Why do you keep saying you can't do anything? Nancy hesitated for a moment. She got a little embarrassed, rolled her eyes at her sister. What do you mean by that? The woman sighed and smiled conciliatingly. I mean that you're always saying time after time that you can't do anything about it, even though you don't even try. Nancy looked at Christina in surprise, forgetting about her coffee. She continued to express her pain. Tell me, why were you afraid to meet that man? What if he really would have helped James to swim? After all, you could have taken your son for a ride. I'm afraid my nephew is absolutely right. You've always been like that, afraid of everything and running around. Christina sat down very close to Nancy and took her hand. You need to be more flexible over looking at things from different angles. You know what I mean. Relax. Nancy thought for a moment. She knew her sister was right, and she realized that no one but Christina would tell her the truth. The woman often refused to do something just because she was afraid. Her mother-in-law came to mind again. Why didn't I confront her right away? I ran away from my problems again. Sad, Nancy thought. Maybe I do need to be a little more free and decisive. Christina watched the expression on her sister's face carefully. She rose to her feet and said quietly to me, it's time to fuck off. I have to go to work and check on things. I'll be back in a couple days. Think about what I said. A couple minutes later, Nancy heard the sound of a car. It went on, and Nancy was still visiting her sister. She didn't worry about work anymore, but eventually she would find another one. Who would want her there? Her husband, an alcoholic in town, or an older son who won't even talk to her? And most of all, probably her mother-in-law, who wanted to live. She succumbed. She thought about Christina's words for a long time, analyzing and thinking about it. The woman thought that she was indeed too modest, indecisive, soft-spoken, fearful, and anxious. It occurred to her that it would be a good idea to try to correct this. At one point, she even recognized that George was right. She really was in desperate need of rest. One evening, she even ventured to call her boss and thank him. The man was glad to hear his assistant. He praised the woman and told her to rest as long as necessary, noted Nancy's fresher and more alert voice, and hinted that she would make up for it later. The woman herself noticed a favorable change in herself. The black eyes had disappeared, the fine lines had resolved, and the deep wrinkles no longer looked like glow worms. Her posture straightened, her hair regained its luster, and the main thing in my soul, there was hope. Seemed to be based on nothing in particular, but it was beautiful nonetheless. Christina, back at the villa, talked Nancy into a trip to the beauty parlor. There the woman got a good haircut and dyed her hair a bright chocolate color. While at the salon, Nancy even allowed herself to exchange a few phrases with a girl she didn't know. The woman felt the taste of life again. She suddenly realized that she was ready to fight her problems with renewed vigor. Once again, she and James went for a walk to the beach. When they reached the water, James said with sadness in his voice that it was a pity I couldn't go swimming. Nancy wanted to agree that it was a shame, but she restrained herself. She looked into her son's eyes and said confidently, "We'll think of something." Suddenly a voice came from behind. "Hello, you must be our new neighbors. Let's get acquainted." A stout man approached them. He walked briskly and waved at them. His thick gray hair was neatly enrolled, and on his round face it was as if it was written that he was a good man. On a normal day, Nancy would certainly have immediately turned around and walked away. But today the woman decided to change her habits. She took a step towards him and extended her hand to the man. "Hello, my name is Nancy, and this is my youngest son, James. Pleased to meet you." The man gently took her hand and kissed it unexpectedly gallantly. All the blood came to Nancy's face from embarrassment, and as if he hadn't noticed it, he turned to the boy. "It's nice to meet you, young man. My name is Leo. I saw you here a couple days ago, but you ran away so fast. Catch up with what? There was no way to catch up with you." He laughed merrily. "You recently bought a villa from us here. Haven't seen you before." No, we're here visiting, staying with my sister. We're resting, regaining our strength. James needs fresh air. It's good for him to walk, to build up his muscles." "That's right. You are good," the older man said and patted the boy on the shoulder. James was a little embarrassed, but he dared to say something. "And you? Would you mind backing me up? I'd like to swim so much. I can do it. My arms are strong. But my mom, she's afraid for me. Why don't you just stick around?" Leo laughed good-naturedly, but before he could answer, he was interrupted by Nancy. No, not at all. We have no right to stress you out." The woman looked embarrassed and began to move strands of her lustrous hair. "I'm only in favor of it," Leo agreed cheerfully. "I was going to suggest it myself. I can assure you that amateur swimming is mostly hands-on, and it's not very deep. The current may seem strong, but it is deceptive. I'd be happy to help you." Nancy fell into a stupor. Her first thought was to say goodbye to that man, turn around and walk away, but moved by her fear for her son, she agreed. "Thank you, Leo. Let's give it a try." The woman helped her son off his extra clothes, took his crutches from him. Leo proved to be a sturdy man, though he was much older than Nancy. He put his shoulder to James for support, and they went into the water together. The boy was absolutely delighted. He laughed and twitched amusingly as the water reached first to his waist and then higher. Nancy was overjoyed for her son that such a small, modest dream had finally come true. After meeting Leo, Nancy began to keep in constant communication with him. They saw each other often, went for walks with James, and talked a lot. The woman enjoyed talking to such an intelligent man. He reminded her of George in some subtle way. In the course of another conversation, it turned out that Leo was also a doctor. He often asked the woman about her son's illness. He asked about the causes of the disease, about its complications. Nancy answered every question without hesitation. But when she finally learned that Leo was not just a doctor, but a professor and a leading orthopedic surgeon, she was shocked by such an unexpected gift of fate. The man gave them many recommendations, after the implementation of which James began to feel much better. One evening, Leo invited Nancy for a walk alone without James. He said he wanted to have a serious talk with her. Nancy happily agreed. And to her sister's reasonable question, what exactly would this conversation be about? She shrugged her shoulders absent-mindedly. How would I know? James did not object to this turn of events. He was happy to stay at home with Aunt Christina. Nancy, good evening. Leo smiled broadly at his companion. You look more and more beautiful every day. I must say Nancy smiled modestly and thanked him. Thank you. How are you doing? Leo, I'm fine. Went to my clinic today to check on the staff without me. Not a prankster. Can't be on vacation for too long, you know. We're workaholics. He laughed softly. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. Yes. Nancy looked at her companion carefully. During the conversation, they walked slowly along the neighboring plots, stopping now and then to take a closer look at a tree, a shrub, or a flower. I've been thinking about your case for a long time, and James is such a nasty injury and not well treated. Poor kid. In general, I consulted with colleagues, and we would like to offer you a high-tech operation using titanium fonts. In our city, this method is used only in our clinic. He stopped abruptly, looked Nancy in the eyes. Nancy lowered her gaze. Thank you, Leo. Thank you for your generous offer, but we can't afford it. We don't have any money at all. Nancy, she shook her hands dramatically. You've got me all wrong. I'm offering you the surgery for free. The woman was speechless. What do you mean? Free? She said shyly at last. It doesn't work like that. Leo answered her questions patronizingly and with favor in his voice. He spoke in the tone of voice that teachers usually use when patiently explaining a new topic to their students. Of course, there's no such thing as free. I meant free for you. I'll take care of all the expenses. Nancy was about to begin to retort. Her eyes flickered, and her hands shook slightly. But the man stopped her with one lordly gesture of his hand. Nancy, you don't have to worry about me. I'm not poorer for it. I can afford it. I'm interested in your case from the point of view of my research. So you can consider that by putting your son at my disposal, you will pay the clinic for the operation. He said firmly. You will have to come to my clinic next week. We'll do all the necessary tests there. We'll take the tests and set a date for the operation. Well, why don't you say something? Nancy couldn't believe her happiness. She had dreamed of this operation for so long. She knew just as well as James dreamed of being able to walk again. He often told his mother about his dreams. In them the boy was running, going to school, playing sports. She stood there unable to get a word out of herself. Tears glistened in the corners of her eyes. But they were different tears, tears of real happiness. Finally, the woman spoke. Thank you. Thank you. I can't believe it. Leo, I'll pay you back the full amount. I promise. Leo put his hand up again, interrupting Nancy. If I wanted you to pay me back, I would have lent you the money. Please stop bickering. Think of your son, the man said, almost angrily, and pointed forward, inviting Nancy to continue their walk. Excuse me, oh, I'm sorry. The woman followed her interlocutor, trying to find the right words. So when can you come to the clinic? The doctor repeated his question. Nancy, I smiled gratefully. We are completely free. As you wish, the woman replied. Well, let's go then. He stopped talking, pulled out some kind of notebook, resigned to making notes. Let's do it this Wednesday. Okay. Later, I just don't know how to thank you. Leo smiled and held out his hand to her. The best thank you for me would be if you are in a good mood, and give it to your boy. On the way back, Nancy did not walk. She literally flew home, unable to feel her feet under her from happiness. And from time to time, she still stopped to pinch her arm. It seemed to her that everything that was happening around her was a beautiful dream. When she returned, she immediately told her sister about everything. What a stroke of luck. How lucky are we? Christina rejoiced. Nancy, I got some myself, but the same phrase kept running through her mind. Everything is for a reason. After some thought, Nancy decided not to tell her son about the operation. She didn't want to give him false hope. The tests would be bad or something. However, James himself realized that something good had happened. His mother was too happy and elated when she learned about Leo Pavlovich's proposal, which was presented to him as a complete examination. The excited boy sat up on the bed and clapped his hands. Mommy, I feel that Leo will definitely help me. I will walk on my own again without crutches, without a stroller. You will, Nancy answered him. She gently stroked her son's head and began to help him get ready for bed. It was deep into the night when Nancy sat alone in the silence of the Grand Palace. The sky was clear and starry. A light warm breeze faintly touched her face. The silence of the dacha village died away, made somewhere in the distance. Thinly and pitifully cried the unknown night birds. Nancy sat on the bench swing, admiring the clear sky, noting a familiar constellation. The smile never faded from her face. Suddenly, she thought she recognized a constellation of fish in the sky. The image of her husband immediately appeared in her mind. According to his zodiac sign, he was a fish. However, she was disappointed in him. Lately, she suddenly realized that she missed him, and still loved him. Frank had gone away to work shifts before. True, such work never brought anything to the family. He always came home drunk. As a rule, he started spending the money he earned on the way to his hometown. Although it was not always possible, but the couple usually called each other. During Frank's departure, they exchanged the latest news and just talked on the same watch. Did anything change? Frank never called Nancy. Neither did she. The resentment against her drinking husband was too strong. She sighed heavily. She wanted to call her husband and tell him all about the new acquaintance, the surgery, and all the changes that had happened to her over the summer. She twirled an cell phone in her hands and tucked it into her pocket. It's getting late, Nancy thought, flinging it skyward. One more mesmerized look and went to bed. Before Friday, they had already done all the necessary tests. Now all that was left to do was wait. Would James be allowed to undergo surgery? Leo's clinic happened to be in a neighboring large city. It was modern and clean, and the doctor seemed very qualified. James, like his mother, was absolutely delighted. He enjoyed looking at everything here. He walked the corridors, happily met the staff, and even made friends with one of the patients. It was a boy the same age as James. Also preparing for the upcoming orthopedic surgery, Nancy was glowing with happiness and prayed to God that the tests came back good and my son had the surgery. I still can't believe how lucky we are. Christina, who had come to visit them, said to her. Me too. Wow, I didn't want to talk to Leo at first. I was afraid of him, and I was afraid to talk to just anyone. Nancy answered thoughtfully. I told you a long time ago. Remember, it's time to make some changes in your life. You see how everything has turned out so well now. Even your mother-in-law, she's here for a reason. Oh, I don't agree with that. Nancy laughed. She's been bleeding me dry. By the way, Christina put her cup on the coffee table. You've already told Frank when he's coming back. Frank said Nancy's husband's name thoughtfully. Frank, no, I haven't. We haven't spoken since he left. Nancy, the sister said indignantly. How can you do that? He is, after all, James's father. He has a duty to know. You're right, of course you're right. Nancy fixed her clothes and stared blankly out of the window. So why don't you just sit there? Call him and tell him. Call him myself. The woman was genuinely surprised. Of course, we didn't quarrel, but after that obedient conversation, I don't know what to think. You won't know until you get up the courage to call. Christina parried. Calls come on. Nancy reluctantly pulled out her phone and decided to call her husband after all. Whatever kind of relationship were they in, Christina was right. He had to be aware of the upcoming surgery. James. She selected the right contact, pressed the call button. It buzzed. He didn't answer the call. The woman put the phone away, looked at her sister. She understood without words. No answer, Nancy said. And resentment began to choke her again. I think this is the end. What end? Christina raised her eyebrows indignantly. Come on, don't get so worked up. As you can see, Clara, by all appearances, succeeded in her plan. She divorced us. Nancy sighed sadly. She didn't know whether she should be sad or happy. But then the phone rang. Frank calling back. With hope in his voice, Christina asked. Nancy glanced at the cell phone screen. Her eyes lit up. It was Leo. Hello. She quickly answered the call. After a few seconds, a smile of joy lit up her face. Yes, thank you. Nancy counted into the receiver. When she put the phone aside, Christina looked at her sister expectantly. So did the surgery get scheduled? Yes, Nancy smiled broadly. Yes, it's scheduled for the very beginning of September. Nancy. Christina jumped up to her sister and hugged her tightly. How excited am I? She released the woman from the hug and looked at her carefully. You can deal with Frank later. What matters now is our James. Nancy was happier than ever. Finally, at least one of her problems was almost solved. She walked briskly to the yard to find her son and tell him the good news. It was nearing the middle of August, and the first leaves were beginning to fall from the trees. Nancy and her son continued to visit her sister. Nancy, you might say, had finally come to her senses. She herself noticed how she looked better and felt better and better every day. She had almost learned not to be afraid of everything in the world no longer in perpetual stress. She finally realized that everything in this life should be fought for, not just floating along. James, this vacation was good for him too. He gave up video games on his own, read a lot, and took up sports as much as possible for himself, and recommended by doctors. James was working out hard and preparing for surgery. He dreamed of one day riding a sport bike again. One day, Christina took Nancy shopping and her sisters shopping. Her friends picked out a new closet for her. Christina insisted on it and took all the expenses on herself, saying that was a gift. And so our heroine Fresher rested in beautiful and strong clothes, sat in the living room, and drank coffee waiting for her sister. James came into the room and stopped, leaning on his crutches. He looked at Mom and asked Aunt Christina, "Where is Mom?" "I wanted to ask her something." Nancy was taken aback. She looked herself up and scrutinized her son's face. "James, what's wrong with you? You don't recognize your mother." A look of intense surprise appeared on the boy's face. He wiped his eyes shut and opened them sharply. "Mom, it's you. Who else? Honey, what are you doing?" Nancy got up restlessly from the couch and walked over to her son, checking to see if he was okay. The boy looked a little confused. "I thought you were Auntie, Christina. Have you become so much like her?" Nancy smiled softly. "Of course we look alike. We're twins." "Well, yeah. James, come closer. I know it's just that you two used to be so different, but now you look exactly the same." The woman smiled and couldn't believe her ears. She was insanely pleased to realize that she looked like her sister again. Nancy remembered how upset she had been when she had seen her the day they arrived. She happily noted to herself that she felt like herself again. "Was there something you wanted to ask me?" Nancy asked. "Do you remember when I used to go out on my own? I met some of the other guys then. Do you mind if I go out alone with them again? There are older boys there. If anything, they'll help me." Nancy still feared for her son, but agreed. She took James' phone numbers from his new friends and told him to give them hers just in case. She finally realized that you can't deprive a child of his childhood, and his illness is not a barrier. You can always find a way out, and not to shake and be afraid of every step. After walking her son to the gate, she returned to the living room. Christina was already there. "I thought so." Nancy said to her, "It's very nice here, of course, but I have to get on with my life. I can't stay with you forever and live off you. Anyway, it was time for me to go home, find Kevin, and finally deal with my mother-in-law, if we still have her." Nancy's voice trembled. "That's right." Sister Christina nodded approvingly. "But maybe you can do it later. James is so nice here. I'd love to. But you can't keep dodging problems forever. Are you right?" Christina's thinking. "Listen, why don't you leave James with me? He and I will work things out just fine. And he told me yesterday that he's made some friends here." "Oh, I hadn't really thought about that." Nancy was visibly nervous. She'd never left her sick son unattended in her life. He's not too stressed out. "What on earth are you talking about?" Christina waved his hands in surprise. "You know how much I love my nephews. I'd love to be with James. Go deal with your insufferable mother-in-law. Go find Kevin. I miss him just as much." Nancy thought for a moment. She knew she couldn't put it off any longer, but she didn't want to leave without James. After many minutes of thought, she finally nodded and agreed to her sister's suggestion. "You're right. I'll go home tomorrow. And I don't think James would mind staying here." Christina looked at her face. "How's it going, sis?" "Keep it that way." Nancy was standing at the gate. James, when he heard that his mother was coming back, had offered to leave him with his aunt. He was glad when he found out that Mom had already made that decision. Now the son and his sister came out to see her off. They hugged each other tightly, and Nancy was just about to go out. But James called out to her, "Mom, wait." The boy approached the woman and looked her seriously in the eye. "Can you get Kevin out? I'm so anxious to get him back to the way he used to be." Nancy was immensely surprised at her son's words. After all, the brothers had been getting along very badly lately. She put her hand on his shoulder and answered just as seriously. "Yes, I promise," kissed her son on the forehead and started down the road towards the station. A serious conversation with her mother-in-law was waiting for her on the train. On her way home, she tried calling her eldest son again, but all in vain. The teenager was still not answering the phone. The situation was the same with her husband. The woman did not dare to call her mother-in-law. She thought it would be better to talk to her face to face. When she finally reached her entrance, she suddenly realized that she was still afraid and did not want to plunge back into her problems. What if the mother-in-law has already rented our apartment to someone? The woman thought, what if Frank is there with some woman? What if the worst guesses were worse than the worst? Tortured Nancy. Finally exhaling and pulling herself together, she went up to her floor. Barely opening the door, she stood still in horror. She was startled by the harsh listening noise coming from the apartment, from her own apartment business. She didn't know what to think. Opening the door with a quick step, she stepped inside and stopped like a stumble. The place was a complete mess. Right in the hallway stood a stepladder from the wall, collected wallpaper, all around in some paint cans. It took the woman a few seconds to realize that her apartment was being renovated. Her mother-in-law's voice came from the kitchen. Still ringing and annoying, Nancy shook her head, shaking off her shock, almost hitting a paint can with her foot. She walked into the kitchen and experienced an even greater shock. Standing next to the window was Kevin, her oldest missing son. He was holding a large paint roller. He was painting the ceiling with confident strokes. Clara, sitting nearby, whom Nancy hadn't noticed in the midst of this spectacular sight, called out to Nancy, "It's you?" Asked her mother-in-law. Her tone was one of joy and genuine surprise. "I don't recognize you. I thought Kevin, your age, had come to see us." Clara laughed loudly as usual. Kevin turned around, smiled, and said, "Hi, Mom." Nancy couldn't believe her eyes. Her oldest son was alive and well and looking better than ever, and yet he was at home doing repairs. "Where were you? Why didn't you answer?" "I could barely get it out. My mother was dumbfounded too." "I was here. My grandmother and I are making repairs, and my grandmother turns out to be a real piece of work. World history. Odds." Kevin looked proudly at his grandmother, and the latter did not stay in debt and winked at him in a cocky way. He didn't answer. Kevin continued his monologue. "At first she just didn't want to talk, and then I lost the phone. How are you? How's it going?" Nancy came closer to the goats, looked at her son closer. Surely he's not a trick of the eye. Nothing wrong with him. Just in case, she gingerly touched his leg. She couldn't reach any lower. "Everything is fine," Nancy smiled cheerfully. "I come with good news to add to the conversation," cut in Clara. Well, well, what's the news?" "James is having surgery in September," Nancy said excitedly, not hiding her pride. "And it's free." "Nancy, I can't believe what I'm hearing." Clara rose from her stool in delight. "But how?" Her daughter-in-law smiled modestly and answered her, "I'll tell you all about it later. It's a long story. James and I just made some useful acquaintances." Clara nodded. Nancy caught herself thinking that her mother-in-law looked as if she knew it would be like this. Clara said, giving her voice an instructive tone, "See, all it took was a little change in your habits and some rest." She looked at the kitchen. "All right, you can tell me all about it later. In the meantime, you look at what the little one and I have already managed to do." The woman came out of the kitchen, beckoning her daughter-in-law to follow her. Together, they proceeded to the bathroom. Seeing what became Nancy here, thought she had fallen into a fairy tale. She simply did not recognize her bathroom. The sink was new, perfectly clean. The once so annoying to Nancy shabby pipes were gone. In their place was a new silver towel drying rack. The bathroom itself was lined with shiny coffee tiles and a dimly dull light bulb. Shade-less lampshades were replaced with bright, spotlights. The once shabby and dirty green walls were done and painted above the tile in a nice color. Nancy on the favorite. By the way, everything was so fresh, so clean. The restroom adjacent to the bathroom had been given a complete makeover too. A new toilet bowl, tiles smooth and fresh, painted walls, a neat hanging cabinet for household supplies. Nancy simply stopped comprehending what was happening. She only asked quietly, glancing at her mother-in-law, Clara, How is that so much money? Who put that nonsense in your head? The one with the smirk. The woman asked. I withdrew a little from my savings account. We live frugally in the village. We have our own money. But it's not as expensive as it may seem. We spend only on consumables and plumbing. And that's the simplest one we took. And everything else we did ourselves with our own hands. Clara put her palms forward, as if demonstrating the truthfulness of her words. Come on, I'll show you something else. We've already changed the wallpaper in the nursery. No offense, but we're not in the bathroom yet. We're sleeping in your bedroom with Frank. What do you mean, Clara? Nancy said with delight. And she added, how did you get my Kevin to participate in the renovation? I couldn't even get him home for the last 6 months. And you have to have a different approach for each one. The mother-in-law began to lecture her daughter-in-law again. But this time Nancy didn't mind it at all. She listened attentively to her brave relative as she proudly boasted of the new renovation. As Nancy drove back to town, all sorts of terrifying scenarios swirled in her mind. She imagined her husband having an affair with his mistress. She imagined Kevin setting up a real brothel in the apartment. She imagined many things, but she couldn't imagine her mother-in-law making the renovations she had dreamed of and bringing her eldest son home. Nancy was over the moon. She quickly changed her clothes and started to help her family with the renovation. Together, they finished sawing the ceilings and painted the walls in the kitchen and glued special panels on the apron of the kitchen set, which, by the way, changed the fronts. Mother-in-law found somewhere on the sale, as she said, for pennies a little used knot and previous owner's oak fronts. Yes, from the very real, fresh, smooth oak. The miracles continued. Over the next few days, the renovation of the apartment continued in full swing. Nancy watched Kevin cautiously at first, trying to see if his son was off drugs and alcohol. When she was convinced that her son was completely sober and was preparing to pass his tails at school to move up to the next grade, she almost lost her mind. The overjoyed mother wanted to ask Kevin about everything. How he had managed to quit his bad habits, how he had decided to leave his awful company. But Nancy was afraid to alienate her newly found eldest son. With unnecessary questioning, she was happy to communicate with both Kevin and her mother-in-law. And the repairs were no burden at all. One warm evening, Nancy, suddenly remembering that she was on her way to find out about her mother-in-law, sincerely apologized to her. For God's sake, Clara, I apologize for accusing you then without reason? Guiltily, said the daughter-in-law. She now really thought that she had just heard that phrase. The mother-in-law graciously forgave her suspicious daughter-in-law. I understand. She's Nancy. You were creepy back then, weren't you? What tired looking. Scary, by God. She answered her, and both women cried and hugged each other tightly. During these few days in the joyful bustle and cares, Nancy suddenly realized that her mother-in-law was not at all such a nasty old woman. Yes, she was a little peculiar, of course, but not mean at all. Now Nancy was anxious to ask Clara about her husband. Where he was, why he wasn't answering his phone, but she didn't dare. Embarrassed. After a few more days, Nancy felt that it was time for her to return to work. No matter how well her life was going, she still needed the money. And she missed her clinic, her colleagues, and even her patients. She had warned George in advance that she would be coming to work soon. Nancy was already standing at the reception desk. Lily, the receptionist, did not recognize a colleague. So nice and fresh. And Nancy looked, how nice to see you. George greeted his assistant with joy. He carefully pulled out a chair in front of her so the woman could sit down. He walked over and sat at his desk. You look great, just great. The man left approvingly. Thank you. With gratitude in her voice, Nancy replied. She changed a little, but dared to say what she was thinking. You know, I was angry with you at first, terribly angry. But you were so right about everything. I really needed that vacation. Sure, it took a little longer, but I really got more rest than ever and solved a lot of my problems. I can see that very well. I see it now, the doctor replied, smiling broadly. Like children. Like a young son. George, you won't believe it. And Nancy told the supervisor everything that had happened to her in the last 2.5 months. The dentist listened to his assistant attentively and occasionally asked clarifying questions. It was obvious how genuinely happy he was for her. "Now that you have rested, fully regained your strength, I have to confess to you," said the doctor, a little embarrassed. "What's the matter?" Nancy moved forward, expressing concern. "It's that my temporary assistant is an idiot." The doctor laughed good-naturedly. "I've missed you as a professional and as a friend too. I hope you will be able to take up your duties very soon." Nancy went back to work. Her attentiveness was enviable. Each of the patients again, as before, noted the woman's neatness, her carefulness, and her focus on her work. Her mother-in-law and her son-in-law, who had successfully passed all the transfer exams, were waiting for her at home. Her eldest son. The renovation was slowly coming to an end. In the evenings after work, the woman helped her loved ones and cooked something delicious under the careful guidance of attentive Clara. And on the next weekend, she went to her sister's villa to check on her youngest son and share the latest news. When Nancy returned back to the apartment, she caught sight of a man's shoes in the hallway. They were her husband Frank's shoes. The woman walked breathlessly into the kitchen. Nancy's soul of mine, Frank, broke out in a wide smile. His eyes shone. He looked better than ever, and most importantly, he was completely sober. "Frank," Nancy was at a loss for words. "How are you? How's your work?" "Fine," the man replied, proudly raising his chin. "Nancy, how good do you look, as good as you did 20 years ago?" Frank moved closer to his wife and hugged her tightly. The woman stood motionless. She couldn't believe that her Frank was completely sober. For the past few years, he had never returned from a watch so fresh and trim. Such a turnaround was a true miracle for the family. She said quietly and shocked as why did you what happened? Frank laughed. "It's like this. I don't drink at all anymore." And he hesitated, quickly walked out of the room, and just as quickly came back in. "This is for you." Smiling broadly, he bore his wife a gift box. At this, Nancy opened the present with interest and was surprised to find there a new bright, ceremonial clothes and a small jewelry box. The woman opened it and marveled. Inside were small gold gems with some kind of green pebble at the base. "But how do you like it?" the man asked with a gasp. "I do." Nancy covered her mouth with her hand in admiration. She hugged her husband and poked him on his clean-shaven cheek. She ran off to try on her new earrings. Frank, who had followed her, continued talking, and also this to Vanya. "I bought new sneakers, James. I want to give you a new computer, but I don't have enough money. And also a beautiful red dress." The woman took an example of earrings and immersed herself in front of the mirror. Then she turned to her husband and slowly walked slowly in front of him, modeling gait. The couple laughed in unison. Nancy, not hiding her curiosity, asked, "Why have you changed so much? I've been praying for you for so long. And now it's so easy." Frank laughed again. "Well, I've got a steady job now, a good one. I'm not a fool to push through an opportunity like that. And when my wife is so beautiful, kind, affectionate, how can you trade her for alcohol?" He took Nancy's hands and pulled her to him. "In fact, ask my mother, you shouldn't have disliked her." He winked slyly at his wife and left the room. Nancy thought deeply. What did he mean by that? She turned back to her family on the wall and surveyed the newly renovated kitchen as if anew. Clean, smooth walls, new kitchen cabinetry. Even the refrigerator was new, big, spacious. Nancy had always thought appliances were very, very expensive. But the wise Clara suggested that they could be bought cheaper. For example, a used but still decent item, or you could pick up a good discount at the store. Nancy couldn't. She looked at her apartment, at her family, and still couldn't believe everything had worked out so well. She looked at her mother-in-law carefully. She was laughing, telling an old joke to her grandson. Nancy noted to herself that her mother-in-law's loud voice was not at all obnoxious, and the jokes were silly. Clara noticed her attentive gaze and came closer. "I see you want to ask something." She smiled slyly. "Okay, you can ask your questions. Let's go out on the balcony. Let's not disturb our men." The women quietly went out of the kitchen. When the balcony and the door closed, Nancy immediately pounced on her mother-in-law with questions. "How? How did you manage all this? Frank promised you would tell me what you did. Share. Repair Kevin. Sober Frank, I don't understand. Clara laughed out loud. I realized a long time ago, my dear, that there was something wrong here, didn't I? The last time Frank came to see me, I knew right away. There's trouble in my son's family. What's next? The woman asked quietly. What? I had to take matters into my own hands. I don't know your character. Don't take offense, but you're too softly warm, daughter, and not flexible at all. I came here to give you a real beating. I'm sorry again for what I said to you, but you really needed to go away and get some rest. But how did you know I was going on vacation? I could have gone anywhere. Nancy asked. Clara laughed merrily again. I'm telling you, knowing you like the back of my hand. Where else would you have gone? And your sister? A wise woman, I know. She wouldn't give you bad advice. Look what you've become. And all you had to do was nothing. Why? That way you could have just said, oh really? My mother-in-law's hands are splayed. I never told you. You did every time we called, but you didn't listen. I mean, you did. I didn't really hear you. So I had to do it on the sly. And I faked that conversation too. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't hear that, Nancy said in surprise. Yes, and slyness itself. Nancy smiled broadly. But how did you wean Kevin off the drugs? How did you do it? How? Did you have to act like you did? Tricky. Later, Clara smiled. I told him that some beautiful girl was looking for him, that she'd made a date with him and given him the address. There was no pretty girl, the woman inquired. Good point. And the address was an addiction clinic. The one at the church. There I showed him when he arrived what could happen to him if he didn't quit that stuff. And then I arranged for his treatment. He was there for a month and a half, which is why he hasn't returned your calls. They're not allowed to use the phones there. Believe me, dear Kevin, I get it. He'll keep studying and everything will be fine now. Just one thing. Nancy looked at her mother-in-law with undisguised admiration, and that I promised my grandson I'd have a serious talk with you both. Tell me, why are you forcing him to study economics? Kevin's dream is to go to gymnastics school. You know how much he loves soccer, right? I know, but no. But my mother-in-law interrupted Nancy. Just because you don't like your kids' choices doesn't mean they're wrong. You're right. No matter how short-sighted you think he is right now, it's his life, you know? It's his own, and he has to choose his own path. And you and Frank should just go along with it. Help support him. Everybody has their place in this life, honey. And success can only be achieved by doing what you love. Nancy thought deeply. She was well aware that her mother-in-law was more right than ever. But it was hard for her to admit it out loud, so she only asked quietly, what about Frank? And Frank was the easiest to guide to the true path. Why was he drinking? Because he wasn't happy. I promised him that very soon you and his wife would stop being such a bun and start supporting him. You will. Of course I will. Good for you. Our parishioners helped me find him a job. One of them has a rich relative who needed a reliable security guard. I told my son that this job was his only and last chance to get his life together. You see, now on that tender wife, happy children, a favorite house and a job is all he needs to be happy in America. And he's not the only one. It's not much at all, is it really? You're right about everything. I'm sorry again. So how did you help James? Who is this Leo of ours, really? Nancy's mother-in-law laughed out loud. You're the one who helped James. I had nothing to do with it. Although, if you want my opinion, I think it's your new temper. Tell me before, you would never ever talk to a stranger. You see, it can be good to relax a little, put things in perspective. You're right. Thank you, dear Mom. Nancy, without hiding her emotions, threw herself into Clara's arms. Now she couldn't believe that her mother-in-law's once-hated visit had transformed her life. You're welcome, daughter. It's been almost a year since the events described above. James, the operation was a success. The boy recovered easily and was able to walk again without crutches. Like all normal children, he started to go to school. He had a lot of new friends and new hobbies. Kevin finished 11th grade very well. Not without a C, right? But we can't all be great at math, as the family joked. And he entered, as he dreamed, the physical education school on a budgetary basis perfectly prepared. He passed all the necessary standards, just brilliantly. Passion for sports helped him to meet a good and simple girl, and the old company and bad habits the guy forgot forever. Frank, in turn, completely abandoned drinking. He worked hard, was well regarded by his superiors, and by the end of his first year, he was promoted to shift supervisor at an important facility. Nancy was happy. She worked at her pleasure, did the household chores, spoiled her sons and husband with various goodies. The family had paid back all their debts and were now living in complete prosperity. The happy family now divided the summer into two parts. The first half they spent at Christina's villa, and the second half in the village, at her parents' at Frank. It turns out that to be happy is very simple. The main thing is to be open, optimistic, and necessarily able to love. It is important not to put your hands down and be able to look at your problems from different sides. Such qualities will definitely be rewarded. After all, the main thing in life is to be able to this very life and really enjoy it.
Subscribe and click the bell.
Olivia walked slowly from the bus stop to the office. It was early morning October, and there was a gray pre-dawn gloom, a piercing wind and rain dripping down. The office building where she had recently taken a job as a cleaner was in an industrial area. A bit far from the bus stop, but what can you do? The pay was good, the work was scarce, and Olivia needed the money. Now it's an hour and a half to work before the employees come, and rather to another office, located in the center of the city. There's a lot less work in those buildings than in the stores. Olivia once worked as a cleaner in a large shopping center. No sooner does she clean the floor than someone already walked on it with dirty shoes and all over again, and some of them even threw garbage in front of her defiantly. They say that she is a cleaner, so fulfill your duties. It was humiliating, but what choice did she have? It is necessary to live somehow, to raise a daughter, and count on no one, along with Ashley at each other, in the whole world. Sometimes it became so dreary, there was no reliable male shoulder. She had to do everything by herself. Olivia had never known any parental affection at all. She saw that mom and dad support, even many adults. Her neighbor, for example, can quietly leave her children at her grandparents' and rest. Her parents give her gifts and money, and just a kind word to support her in a difficult moment. Everything is easier when you know that you are not alone. And if something happens to her, what will happen to Ashley? After all, they have no relatives ready to take the girl in. Will she be sent to an orphanage? Olivia grew up in an orphanage and did not want such a fate for her daughter. Usually parents regret that their children grow up quickly. Olivia, on the other hand, rejoiced at every new birthday for her daughter, another year older. Ashley recently turned 10 years old. She is already in the 4th grade. By the way, an excellent girl, only 8 years old, and an adult, consider that independent. If God forbid, what and will cope on her own? But of course, Olivia wanted to be near her daughter as long as possible and give her everything she never had: warmth, care, love, support. Ashley is such a good girl. Olivia dreamed of higher education for her. She herself felt she could have studied and worked in a more qualified position than a cleaner, but that's the way life was. What can you do? Not everyone is lucky. Olivia, a graduate of the orphanage, worked as a cleaner at several sites, 2 office buildings and a fitness center. It was possible to combine, however. Dancing with a mop had to be 10 hours a day. So in the evening the woman was very tired. Her lower back ached and her legs hummed, but she had enough to live on, and even for small pleasures, in the form of goodies and extra outfits for Ashley. Olivia liked to dress up her little princess, but she didn't think about herself. Why? She didn't need to attract men. She had enough of an affair with Ashley's father to realize that personal happiness was not for her. Of course, sometimes she dreamed of a prince who would protect her and her daughter from all the hardships of life. But the woman realized that there are no such men. It's just an invented ideal image. Once Olivia tried to work as a salesman, the work seems to be less hard and the salary is more, but quickly realized that it is not her. A merchant should be quick, perky, be able to weigh, persuade to buy not liquid goods, but Olivia could not, and that's all. She was always honest, direct, and sincere. The owner once heard that the new seller, advising an old lady to buy tomatoes cheaper because expensive, beautiful to taste, like grass, and the same day calculated her. Why does he need such employees? And Olivia continued her usual business, washing offices, stores, entrances. The locations changed, but the function remained the same. How long is the drive? The office staff got here by car. Everyone had their own car, even the very young girls and boys. Olivia saw them when she finished her work and walked in the opposite direction to the bus stop. The employees of the company were just arriving at the office, and among all the employees, one young woman in her mid-30s, her age, stood out. Red, shiny in the sun, foreign car, dark glasses, loose hair, she looked so stylish, so refined. Olivia liked to fantasize about what this woman's life was like. Imagine yourself in her shoes. It's her, Olivia, sitting behind the wheel of a luxury car. The air conditioner is running. Her favorite tune is blasting from the stereo. She has a wealthy, handsome husband, caring parents who gave her a start in life. She is valued at work for her ability to make reports and plan competently. Ah, the dream life. And the building is still a long way off. Every morning Olivia had to get up at 5:30 to take the bus across town for an hour and then another half hour to get from the office stop. Olivia lived with her daughter on the outskirts of the city in a 5-story house. After graduating from the orphanage, she had been given a 1-room tiny apartment as an orphan, a small bedroom and living room, a 6-meter kitchen, a long-needed bathroom with humming pipes, creaky wooden floors, but Olivia was happy. After so many years of living in a common room, finally her own corner, separate. Olivia turned it into a cozy nest, a quiet harbor in which it was so pleasant to shelter from the hardships of life. Here she felt good and relaxed. She had her own home. Being a pupil of an orphanage, Olivia entered college. She chose the specialty of cook and pastry chef. She always liked to study. Teachers noted that she had an excellent memory and aptitude for math, but of course, higher education was out of the question. It was urgent to get a working specialty. After graduation from the orphanage, there was only a year to study in college, and then, even if not a dream job, but a job that will definitely not leave hungry. Studying Olivia was given easily. The red diploma already loomed literally in front of the nose. There was only a year. The girl lived then on a scholarship, plus a part-time janitor, but plans for a profession was not destined to come true, because in the life of Olivia he appeared, the fun-loving and seemingly kind and reliable Adam. He studied at the same college, only a year older, and his specialty was different, a catering technologist, a more promising and difficult profession than Olivia, of which Adam periodically reminded. After college, the guy was going to serve in the army and then to graduate. I will work for my uncle at the dairy. He is the head of the sales department. He will find me a good position. Adam shared his plans, and Olivia listened and thought that this is happiness. Adam is a real man. He thinks about the future. He has so many prospects, and he is so smart, and how logically he thinks. You can't go to waste with someone like that." Olivia and Adam often met in the corridors of the college, but at first they did not pay much attention to each other. Olivia had liked him for a long time, smiling, lively, funny, witty, companionable, always surrounded by friends, and one day she ran into him in the same company. Her classmate was celebrating her birthday at the campground, and Adam was among the invitees. Olivia had already graduated from the orphanage and was settling into her new apartment. She felt happy and very grown up, independent. This feeling surrounded her head and created the illusion that the whole world lay at her feet. Adam, as always, was the center of attention. Many girls tried to flirt with him, but he only guffawed. Olivia laughed heartily at his witticisms and even had a few words with the local star. He honored her with his attention, wow, and even agreed with her opinion, supported her in the dialogue, and then the unbelievable happened. It was already evening. Young people were having fun in the house rented for a day. Suddenly, Olivia became stuffy. She really wanted to go out into the air to enjoy the evening coolness and silence of the pine forest. She wasn't going to go far from the base, of course, just in case. She didn't want to become the heroine of some horror movie. Olivia decided to go down to the lake and sit on the shore for a while, listening to the crickets chirping and admiring the stars, large, bright, and somehow very close, the kind you don't see in the city. On a rickety ladder, Olivia went down to the water. There was a luxurious wooden bench, still kept the warmth of the sun, which warmed her all day. It was so cozy to sit on it and look at the ripples on the surface of the lake and mesmerizing, sparkling moon path. And then he came, Adam. He silently settled down beside her. Olivia looked at him in surprise. He smiled a charming smile and broke the silence. "Would you like some company?" He's still asking. Of course, Olivia was all for it. Adam himself condescended to her, a simple girl. He has so many college hotties around him, and he's sitting here with her. "Are you enjoying the party?" asked the guy. "It's fun," Olivia admitted. "But I like it better here. I've never seen such big stars. Haven't you ever been out of town?" "Of course I have," answered Olivia. The orphanages sent their children to camp every summer, but there was an early departure, so the girl was really admiring the starry sky for the first time, not clouded by the light of city lights. "It's beautiful." Adam agreed, staring up at the sky. "But you know what's even more beautiful here?" Olivia shook her head negatively. "You," the guy simply replied, looking his companion straight in the eyes. It was not the first compliment Olivia had heard in her life. Ever since she was a little girl, her teachers had told her that she was very pretty, but to get a compliment from a guy, and a popular one at that, that was something else. Olivia was even dizzy with surprise. Did Adam really like her? "I've been watching you for a long time," the guy continued. "You are very beautiful and yet modest, not like the others. I finally decided to tell you about it." Olivia could not believe her ears. So Adam had liked her all this time, but he'd been too shy to tell her. Well, he was just skillful at hiding his feelings. The girl could not even imagine such a thing. "I'm sick of these painted dolls, like a copycat." Adam continued, "And you're real. You're not like the others. That's why I'm attracted to you." I don't even know what to say." Olivia confessed honestly, but her eyes shone with genuine joy, and Adam understood everything without further ado. He carefully and very gently put his arm around her shoulders. He looked her in the eyes, made sure that she didn't mind, and kissed Olivia. The girl had recently turned 18, but this was her first kiss. Unlike the girls from the orphanage and her classmates, she didn't go out with boys and didn't hurry to grow up. But now Olivia felt really happy, loved, desired, unique. Adam was near her. Warmth and sympathy emanated from him. Tears suddenly came to her eyes. It was nice to realize that you were the source of such strong feelings. After all, Olivia had never been so interested in anyone before, and now he was. "Let's go out," Adam simply suggested. Of course, Olivia immediately said yes. Nightingale sang in her soul. It seemed that life would now change 180 degrees, and everything would finally be fine. No more lonely evenings and longing for a soulmate. Later, the girl learned from mutual acquaintances what really attracted Adam, her free apartment, in which you could organize parties and actually live, without parental notations and control, without pressure and moralizing. The guy knew that Olivia was from an orphanage, and that graduates are given a separate living space. That's why he appeared in her life, just at that moment. He wanted freedom from his parents, who always demanded something from him. The guy got everything as he planned. Adam moved into Olivia's apartment, and now his friends were often here. Neighbors looked askew. No one liked the noisy parties that the guy liked to arrange, but Olivia did not pay attention to the comments. Happiness overshadowed her eyes. Adam was caring and attentive at first, gave flowers, showered with compliments, praised Olivia's cooking. After a noisy feast, he always cleaned the apartment, emptied cans from behind the radiator, washed the floors, shook out cigarette butts in the trash. The guy showed Olivia his favorite movies. The girl did not like them at all, but to make her lover happy, she assured him that she was delighted with such movies. They walked a lot, laughed. Sometimes Adam was away on family business. Then in a neighboring town with his parents went to some relatives. Then with his mother flew to the sea. At these moments, Olivia was left alone and again felt unhappy and lonely. Adam did not introduce her to her parents yet. He said it was too early. "My mother does not want me to marry before the age of 25. She said children, family problems will come. They will pile up. There will be no time and energy for higher education. She wants to see me as a big man." Olivia understood everything and silently accepted the rules of the game. She was fine. 6 months passed when Olivia realized something was wrong with her. Nausea in the mornings, dizziness, and latency. Everything pointed to the fact that she was pregnant. Although Adam had been using protection, something must have gone wrong at some point. A test from the drugstore confirmed those suspicions. Olivia looked at the 2 stripes and experienced a mixture of feelings. The first and the main feeling was joy. She would have a baby, a native being, her son or daughter. It was happiness. Somewhere in her chest, a warmth was already developing that made her feel so light and pleasant. But these were feelings, and her mind told her that not everything was so rosy. Adam finishes college and goes to the army in spring. She still has a whole year to study, and it's a very responsible time. She has to prepare for graduation, to do final work, to practice a lot, and how to manage it all. First with a big belly, and then with a baby in her arms. Yes, and Adam hoped that he would be happy with the news of imminent fatherhood. Of course, there was, but something told Olivia it is unlikely that he is now ready for it. The guy had shared his plans many times, including the army, college, and career. He certainly did not dream about children. The girl for a long time did not dare to tell her. It was good that the guy made the decision to leave on his own, not having to kick that traitor out. True then, left alone in his apartment, the girl still gave vent to tears. Of course, Olivia realized that it would be difficult, very difficult, but for the sake of the child she will cope. Adam then more than once called Olivia and approached her in college, persuaded her to abort, then promised a reward, then threatened, then painted pictures of the hopeless future of a single mother. The girl tried to avoid her former lover by all means. It is good that he has already graduated from college, and then in the army for a year goes, without him easier. Summer vacation came. When Olivia passed the session, the belly was not yet visible. No one and did not guess about her pregnancy. But in the summer everything became obvious. The term was already decent. Olivia had to update the closet. At the end of the summer, at the ultrasound at the women's clinics that the sex of the child, a girl, Olivia looked at the monitor and cried with emotion. She clearly saw the profile of her daughter, snub nose, convex forehead. It's just a miracle. The fetus is healthy and will be delivered around October 15. Indifferently informed the woman doctor. October 15, how many more things do we have to do before then? Olivia needed money, so she officially got a job. Now the girl not only worked as a janitor, but also washed the entrances. The salary increased several times, but there was also more work. It was hard for Olivia to work physically, but where could she go? She was lucky to be hired. At the interview, the girl carefully disguised her belly with a loose blouse. Then, of course, the boss told her everything. Came then, with a belly to work, got an official job. Now the sick leave will go, then you will go on maternity leave. Do you realize you've set us up? All you orphanages are like that, clever and cunning. Olivia was silent. Of course, it wasn't good to hide the fact that she was pregnant when she was employed. It wasn't fair, but what choice did she have? Olivia did not need any sick leave. The pregnancy was surprisingly easy. She went on maternity leave at the right time, and then continued to clean floors unofficially. She needed to save as much money as possible. For the birth of her daughter, Olivia prepared thoroughly. She bought a crib, a stroller, clothes for the newborn. She didn't have enough money for a new one, and who cares? The main thing, very soon she will have a daughter, the only relative in this not cozy world. For her sake, Olivia will make mountains, and everything will be fine. The girl was born on October 15. Ashley immediately announced the labor room with a loud scream, which caused a stream of compliments, and from the midwife. How strong and healthy she is, and what a voice, and what a beauty. Olivia had long ago decided to name the girl Ashley. Olivia clutched her daughter to her chest, looked at her wrinkled red face. Tears rolled down the cheeks of the new mother. She could not cope with the feelings and emotions that overwhelmed her. Now that she had a child of her own, she understood her parents even less. How could they give up on her? Do these people now live quietly somewhere, knowing that they left their daughter, just abandoned at the train station, and fled? Olivia has vague memories of her early childhood. Sometimes she dreamed of something from those distant times, but all as if in a fog. No wonder, because when the policeman found Olivia at the train station, frightened and frozen, she was only 3 years old. The woman still remembered that moment. She was alone among a crowd of people. Everyone is in a hurry. The train is rumbling loudly nearby. She is scared and very hungry. A pack of stray dogs running past. For some reason, Olivia remembered these animals best of all, large, dirty, with tangles of bunched-up hair on their sides, but it was not them that the girl was afraid of. She was afraid of being alone. Before that, there had been grown-up people with her grown-up, probably parents. They had ridden trains together, run somewhere, sat on dark, cold staircases with crowds of people scurrying up and down them. Sometimes one of them would drop a coin into the box next to Olivia. The woman still remembered that small detail, the clinking sound of the coins hitting the bottom. As she grew older, She realized that her parents must have been asking for alms, but why? What had happened? Why did they not work, but picked up? Olivia did not look like a gypsy, blue eyes, light blonde hair. The police tried to look for the girl's parents, but the investigation was fruitless, so Olivia became a pupil of an orphanage at the age of 3.5. From her relatives, she had only a name and a pendant in the form of a key, a silver piece of jewelry on a simple cord. It was around her neck the day she was found at the train station. Olivia knew her own name very well, even at the age of 3, and confidently told it to the policeman, but the surname and address the girl, unfortunately, has not yet memorized. Olivia tried to remember the names of her parents, but nothing worked. But once she knew them exactly. Apparently, she had lost some of her memory due to stress. Stress had a devastating effect on the foundling. Finding herself in an unfamiliar environment, Olivia suddenly stopped speaking, as if she had become numb. Psychologists and speech therapists tried to work with her, but nothing helped. In the end, the child was abandoned and diagnosed with mental retardation. The disease scared away potential adopters from the pretty girl, so in childhood Olivia never found a new family. True then, after almost 10 years, Olivia came to her senses, thawed, speech returned, but it was too late. Teenagers are of little interest to adopters. They prefer babies. Until the 7th grade, Olivia was in a remedial class. After the return of speech, it turned out that she is very capable and speaks beautifully, and complex problems can solve. Teachers and educators were surprised, but what could they do? Yes, the girl is talented, but the time was lost. After the 9th grade, the administration sent Olivia to study at a culinary college. You are a smart girl, you will finish, and then, if you want, go to the university to study further, and so at least specialty bread in hand will be. Hungry will not stay hungry. Doris, the director of the orphanage, reasoned aloud. Olivia agreed with her. The girl was standing in Doris's office and nervously rubbing a pendant, the one from her past life, which she hardly remembered. The pendant. Olivia had cherished it as the only link between her and her family. It must have been worn around the little girl's neck by kind, caring hands. So someone loved her after all, if they made such a gift. There were some pleasant feelings associated with the pendant. Olivia felt as if she had asked someone to buy it for her. The little girl liked the key on the string very much. She was jumping on the spot and begging to make her a present. But who? Someone tall, kind. Face is lost in the fog, but it is clear that this person's smiling mom, dad, uncle, family friend? It's hard to live without roots and without at least some information about relatives. Who is she? Where did she come from? How was her childhood? Does she have any siblings? What happened to her? And why did her parents abandon her, leaving her at the train station? As a teenager, Olivia invented the most unbelievable stories on this subject and always found good reasons for her parents' actions. They were pursued by bandits who wanted to take away Olivia's influential father's business, and Mom and Dad left her at the train station to save their daughter from the massacre. The girl imagined that she was taken by gypsies to beg for alms. By the way, the police worked on this version for some time, but no ends were found. I didn't want to think that she was the daughter of alcoholics and marginalized people who just didn't need a child, even though it was the most plausible option. How many of you are such babies? One of the educators was lamenting, looking at Olivia. I have a lot of experience, and in almost all cases, when babies were found at train stations and markets, their parents turned out to be unworthy people. You're lucky to be alive. You could have fallen on the tracks under the train, or dogs would have dragged you away, because such cases happen. The little girl Olivia did not believe that her parents could be one of those miserable creatures that sometimes came to the orphanage to visit their children. Skinny, wrinkled, ragged, with swollen faces, many without teeth. They always smelled pungent and unpleasant. Freaks! The nurse was indignant. They only need the children for their allowance, so that they have something to drink on. When they run out of money, they immediately remember their parental duty and come crawling back for their children, and children in these families are only misfortune. They'd be better off here in the State House. You probably have the same mom, and your dad may not even know about your existence. At first, the girl did not believe that her parents are marginalized, but as she grew older, she realized that this option is not excluded. Except for the silver pendant, such a beautiful, exquisite thing. Well, could not lowered creatures, like those that sometimes crawled into the orphanage, to choose a child such a piece of jewelry. Olivia cherished the pendant as the apple of her eye and even went to bed with it around her neck. One day the girl found that the jewelry was gone. She was still in the 3rd grade and did not speak. What a hysterics through! A small, quiet girl, Olivia still remembered the despair that came over her at that moment. It seemed that along with the pendant, the hope for the future, for meeting her parents, for everything to be all right, was lost. Olivia was screaming, convulsing, unable to eat or drink. When her strength left her, she just sat in the corner, swaying and howling softly. One of the caregivers realized what was wrong. While the doctor and teachers were trying to cope with the little girl, the woman rushed to the gym, where Olivia had recently had a class, and found the pendant. It had fallen into a crevice between the mats. Seeing the jewelry, Olivia immediately smiled. The girl's tears dried on her face. A happy expression appeared. Olivia hugged the not indifferent kindergarten teacher tightly. The staff exhaled. The problem was solved. It was a pity that not all the staff of the orphanage were as attentive as that young teacher. During the years spent in the institution, Olivia had to endure a lot, insult and humiliation of adults, mockery of peers, and even beatings. The girl tolerated and waited for the moment when she would finally become free and independent. And now what Olivia had never even dreamed of, she had a daughter, her own child. For this she had to leave college. Olivia, you have to earn money and take care of the child. What is there to study? She will get education later. Now the main thing is her daughter, so beautiful, so defenseless. Next to her, Olivia felt very grown up and very strong. Ashley would have a real childhood, with birthdays, walks with her mother around the city, beautiful dresses, and her own shared toys. Olivia would do everything for that. And the young mom tried very hard. She worked hard and gave all her free time to her daughter. Ashley grew up a healthy and smart girl. She answered her mother with love and care. Already at the age of 7, Ashley learned to cook, and the girl knew how to clean since the middle group of kindergarten. The little girl saw how hard it was for her mother and tried to help her in everything, and she also studied well. Ashley did not need to force to do homework. 4s were rare guests in her diary. Adam never once took an interest in the child, but Olivia did not expect miracles. She no longer believed in them. Once she met the father of her daughter in the mall. He was walking in the arms of a pretty girl, smiling his trademark charming smile, looking fascinated companion in the eyes. How familiar was all this? Young Olivia had once lost her head at such behavior from Adam, and he had turned out to be a traitor and a coward. Probably, this pretty girl was going to be disappointed too. Olivia even felt a little sorry for her. Of course, the woman realized that there would come a moment when Ashley would ask her questions about her father, and she had no idea what to say to the child. She certainly didn't want to lie, and she didn't want to keep quiet either. Olivia knew exactly what it was like to live without knowing anything about her parents. Her daughter, of course, was luckier. She had a mother. But it was important to know about her father Ashley, too. How complicated is this? Olivia hoped her daughter wouldn't be approaching her with a serious conversation anytime soon. Here was the office building finally reached. A security guard opened the door for Olivia. The man in his 40s always smiled and winked at the young cleaning lady when she came to work. The woman did not respond to these flirtations. So, there are enough problems and things to do. There is simply no time for romance, no desire either. The building, as always, greeted Olivia with silence and semi-darkness. The employees are probably just waking up and starting to get ready for work, and before they arrive, they have to wipe the floors in the corridors and offices. The equipment and uniform room was under the stairs. Olivia entered it, put on a robe, tucked her hair under her headscarf, looked at herself in the mirror. She is not yet 30, but what a tired look, and these dark circles under the eyes. Something must be done about it. Should I buy some face cream? On the neck glittered her favorite jewelry, the same silver key. Olivia still did not part with the pendant from the past. It became for her a kind of talisman. It seemed that the little key was a protection from all troubles and misfortunes. I wish I knew who had put it on her the first time. Would it remain a secret forever? Smiling at her reflection, the woman took a bucket and a mop and went to the top floor. She always started cleaning from the top. Sebastian sat in his office working on the next report that the accountant had brought him to sign. The figures were pleasing. His construction company was thriving. Profits were steadily increasing. The number of clients was growing. Things were going up, and that was fine. Sebastian, can I make you some coffee? Kathy's secretary, a nice girl, came into the office. The daughter of his former classmate could not find a job after college. Sebastian did not refuse. His friends and acquaintances often addressed him with such requests. He himself had very young children, but as young children, school children. Jordan was in the 8th grade. Nora was finishing the 5th. Wonderful, cute guys. Wife Adriana did not work after the birth of their first child. She devoted herself to her children, took them to developmental classes from an early age, and their heirs were also seriously involved in sports, their son in hockey and their daughter in rhythmic gymnastics. All this, of course, required a lot of investment, time, money, and effort. As for the financial side, Sebastian fully provided for the family from start to finish. Everything else was on Adriana's shoulders, and the results were impressive. From time to time, his wife invited Sebastian to competitions and tournaments where the children always demonstrated excellent results. The man was proud of Jordan and Nora and loved them and his young wife very much. Business, financial stability, a large, cozy house, a friendly family, smart and beautiful wife, always understands everything, no scandals, supports. It would seem, what else is needed for happiness? But Sebastian could not call himself happy. Lived in his soul pain, which will never go anywhere, and the man was well aware of it. Sebastian had once had a completely different life. Then he worked at the factory as a milling machine operator and was happy with a salary that was only slightly higher than the average for their provincial town. But the man at that time was very proud of himself and was happy and carefree. Sebastian could not afford, as he does now, an expensive saloon car or a vacation abroad. He paid the loan for an imported refrigerator and invited his wife to a restaurant, only on holidays. Not Adriana. Then Sebastian was married to a neighbor girl, Doris. But despite this, the man felt much happier than he did now, being a successful entrepreneur and father of 2 wonderful children. Kathy entered the office with a steaming cup of coffee, tall, slender, blonde, bright blue eyes, so similar to. No, better not to remember, too painful, too hard. Sebastian, so much time and money spent on a psychologist. It was a relief for a while, but then the pain and the memories came back. You just have to learn to live with it. Sometimes Sebastian managed to do it. There are so many things to do, so many daily worries and troubles. The firm requires a lot of time and attention. Children every day please with new successes. Loving, beautiful wife distracts with talks about the future. So nice to make plans and dreams together with her. In this whirlwind, heavy thoughts for a while retreated, but it was worth to stop for a while or to see something that reminded of those times, some insignificant detail, as the experienced nightmare came with a new force, like now. Kathy had just brought coffee, and in the midday sunlight, her beautiful blue eyes shone especially brightly. Sebastian immediately thought of other eyes, curious, loving, wide open, and just as blue. They were the eyes of his oldest daughter, his girl, who was now older than Kathy. The last time he saw her, she was 3 years old. Now Olivia is 29 years and 3 months old. Sebastian mentally set the candles on her birthday cake every year, and of course he knew exactly the age of his oldest daughter. That she was living somewhere now, perhaps under a different first and last name, the man had no doubt. The facts said otherwise, but the father felt Olivia was alive, except that finding her was unlikely. He had tried then, and years later too, but no trace of Olivia had ever been found. Guilt and irreparable loss became Sebastian's constant companions. His happiness after the incident was never complete. Sebastian could name the exact day when he last felt calm and relaxed. It was the date of Olivia's disappearance, Sunday, his day off. That day, Sebastian had decided to give Doris some rest. Olivia and I will go to the ponds, walk there, feed the swans, and you rest, because you complain about being tired all the time, said the caring husband, Doris. How great! Sincerely pleased wife. Such wonderful weather. Why should the girls stay at home all day? While you're away, I'll cook something delicious. So that's what it means for you to rest. Sebastian joked. His mood was high. He was proud of his new role as a young father and always enjoyed taking his daughter for walks. He liked to make her happy, and now, when the little girl is only 3 years old, it is so easy. Olivia is genuinely surprised by the most ordinary things and considers her daddy, almost a magician, an unreal pleasant feeling. I'll have time to rest and make goodies, Doris replied. Especially cooking for my loved ones is a real pleasure. Sebastian hugged his wife. They had known each other since childhood. At Olivia's age, Sebastian and Doris, along with the other kids in their house, had been playing in the sandbox. Then they had been in the same class. Sebastian couldn't even remember life without Doris. She was always there, a kindred, understanding, and reliable person. And when Olivia came along, their family became truly happy. Sebastian remembered how he met his wife from the hospital. His family and friends were with him. Sebastian was holding a huge bouquet of roses, and for some reason he was very excited. Finally, Doris appeared on the doorstep with a tight bundle tied with a lush pink bow. Sebastian pulled back the corner of the blanket and stared in amazement at the little girl. The girl was sleeping soundly, with thick dark eyelashes like his own on her chubby cheeks. Sebastian had been jokingly reproached in his childhood for having long eyelashes, and some girl had not gotten such wealth, and now he saw the same ones on his daughter. There was another resemblance, a small mole above the upper lip. The man still remembered his feelings from the first meeting. He was rolled by a warm wave of love and tenderness. He wanted to become a reliable protector for this defenseless baby. Their daughter would be happy. He would give her everything she needed for a secure childhood. He would shelter her from the hardships of life, fill her every day with joy. Sebastian no longer remembered that he had once dreamed of a son. This girl, this sweet baby, in the blink of an eye became for him the center of the universe. The man could hardly hold back tears from his feelings, not enough to cry in front of everyone, but Doris, of course, realized what was happening to her husband. She looked at him and smiled. Later, when Jordan and then Nora were born, Sebastian felt nothing of the sort. Sure, he was happy to have a son and a daughter, but the feeling that the world had turned upside down, that didn't happen. Maybe because Sebastian was already an adult, an established man with a sad past? Or was the novelty effect missing, like when you meet your firstborn? Either way, Sebastian was much more relaxed about the birth of his youngest child than he was about Olivia. The man himself chose the name for his first daughter, Olivia. Doris did not object. She liked it too. The couple together took care of the newborn. With joy and amazement watched the development of the baby, proud of her successes. She was evolving. Sebastian shouted in delight when the daughter stood up in the crib for the first time by herself, on not yet firm legs, and how much joy there was from the first steps, complimentary feeding, another vaccination, a new hairstyle. Everything became a grand event for loving parents. And then Olivia spoke early. She was not even 1.5 years old, the realized word that said the girl was daddy. The father's pride and joy was unbounded. He was ready to tell everyone and everyone that his adored daughter now addresses him properly. Someone said that if the child said the first word daddy, then the next child would be a son. Sebastian, on the one hand, of course, dreamed of an heir, but on the other hand, it would have to share the attention, which now goes to his favorite daughter, with another child. No, perhaps it is too early. Let Olivia be the only princess in their family. The girl grew up fast. It's already been 3 years since Sebastian took her from the hospital. This third day of birth of his favorite child, the man remembered forever. After all, the next time he had already blown out the candles on Olivia's birthday cake, just mentally, 4 candles. Then guests came to their apartment, grandparents on both sides, brother Sebastian and his daughters, and sister Doris and her sons. It was noisy and fun. Olivia was so happy about the holiday and presents, hugging everyone in turn, laughing gleefully, playing with cousins and sisters, and Sebastian admired his princess, and once again amazed at how much she resembled himself as a child. And he was not the only one who noticed it. Olivia, of course, was everyone's favorite, and not even because of the fact that she was the youngest in a large family. It's just that there are such sincere, friendly children who create around themselves a special aura of joy, ease. Next to them, everyone seems better and kinder to themselves. Olivia was just such a girl, open, cheerful, trusting. A gift, not a child. Sometimes Sebastian, listening to the stories of colleagues and acquaintances about their children, envied himself. He was very lucky with his daughter, and with his wife too. The young man quite consciously enjoyed his happiness and mentally thanked fate for it. But everything changed on that sunny May day when Sebastian decided to take his daughter for a walk on the ponds. The ponds. It was, and still is, a gorgeous park not far from their town. Just one stop by train or half an hour by car, but Sebastian didn't have a car yet, so it was decided to travel by train. This park had everything for a wonderful vacation with children. Magnificent nature, attractions, numerous cafes with delicious ice cream, a couple of pizzerias, and of course, the ponds themselves, several large artificial ponds with swans, which their children and adults loved to feed. Doris had dressed her daughter that morning in a new comfortable tracksuit and made her a beautiful hairdo of small braids. The little girl looked like a doll, a modern doll and very fashionable. Sebastian liked to walk by the hand with a beautiful girl. People were looking at them. The man noticed it. Together they looked just wonderful, a young statuesque father and a charming daughter. The mood was wonderful. A couple of stops to the train station, father and daughter walked. It would have been possible to wait for the bus, but the weather was so wonderful that they did not want to shake in a stuffy, dusty, crowded cabin. At the train station, Sebastian bought a ticket for himself. Children under 7 did not have to pay the fare. It was 15 minutes before the train arrived. Father and daughter decided to walk around the local stores. In one of them, they bought themselves a hot dog and a glass of water. Very tasty. Olivia remarked with her mouth full. Yes, Sebastian agreed. But it's not good for you. But we won't get carried away. We can have a little. Having refreshed themselves, the man and the girl continued their shopping trip. Somewhere there was a stall with toys, Chinese consumer goods, but Olivia was happy every time with a new doll or a ball from this stall, so Sebastian looked for a familiar stall. He wanted to please the girl. Suddenly Olivia noticed a beautiful shiny sign, a costume jewelry store. Recently, the little girl realized her belonging to the female gender, loved her mother's cosmetics and jewelry. The girl recently used up her wife's favorite perfume, just poured a bottle of expensive perfume on her jacket, and she also begged her parents to pierce her ears to wear earrings like Lucy from kindergarten. The wife was going to take her daughter to this procedure next weekend. Of course, the young fashionista could not miss such an interesting store. Sebastian followed his daughter with a smile. Looking at the sparkling trinkets, Olivia oohed and ahed, which amused the saleswoman. I want this. She pointed her finger at a massive bracelet of brightly colored stones. No, the best is this. This time the girl's attention was attracted by an open-work tiara. Sebastian realized they couldn't leave here without buying it. But what would suit a little girl like Olivia? Not a ring with amber to give her. The saleswoman helped. She pulled out a box with small light pendants, silver-plated and gold-plated, with and without stones, and most importantly shapes, bears, hearts, ballerinas, just the thing for a child. Olivia greedily looked at all this splendor. At first her eyes were scattered, but then she confidently pulled out of the pile a key, thin, graceful, light. Sebastian noted to himself that his girl seemed to have good taste. Excellent choice. The saleswoman smiled. It's silver. I'll find you a lanyard to match it, so you can wear it around your neck. Olivia left the store happy. She thanked her father and the salesman 1,000 times. And now she was walking along the platform, and on her neck was a lanyard with a silver key. The girl carried herself like a real lady, and Sebastian marveled. Women seemed to have a love of jewelry in their blood, since such a tiny girl was happy with a silver pendant. Sebastian and Olivia had a wonderful time at the ponds, feeding the swans, riding the carousel, eating ice cream and pizza. Sociable Olivia, as always, made new friends and played with the children on the playground for hours. Time flew by. It was time to go home. The train was coming. Olivia reluctantly said goodbye to the girls and boys she had had so much fun with. Taking her father's hand, she obediently walked with him to the station. Among the crowd waiting, Sebastian immediately noticed them, 3 boys in their 20s. They behaved insolently and swaggeringly, swearing, not at all embarrassed by the presence of small children, and no one dared to reprimand them. It was more expensive. Sebastian also kept silent, Better to stay away from such subjects, not enough to fight in front of Olivia. He can't let his daughter go through that kind of stress. So Sebastian prudently moved away from the suspicious company. Unfortunately, the trio turned out to be their neighbors on the carriage. In the train they behaved just as insolently and swaggeringly. The guys sat at the other end of the cabin and did not miss the opportunity to tease any of the passengers. People tried not to respond. They realized that this would be an excuse for more active and obviously unsafe actions on the part of the troublemakers. Sebastian looked thoughtfully at the fields and forests running past. The sun was beginning to set. Olivia was tired from the walk and the experience and had fallen asleep. She was so sweet, so defenseless. Sebastian smiled, looking at his daughter. He wasn't going to wake her up. When the train arrives at the station, the man will gently take her in his arms and carry her home, as he has done many times before. The girl is still so small, so light, just like a piece of fluff. Is it possible that one day this button will turn into a grown-up girl? Surely she will be a real beauty, with those blue eyes. If you want to smoke, you'll have to go out into the vestibule. While the daughter is asleep, you can take advantage of the situation. The man covered the girl with his jacket. At that moment, he could not think that he was doing it for the last time. It seemed to leave for only a couple of minutes. What could happen in this short period of time? The peaceful clatter of the wheels was soothing, bringing back memories of his own childhood, when he'd have traveled with his father on the train, just as Olivia was now. But only not for a walk in the park, but to the village to his grandparents, now his father himself. The door opened abruptly, and the same three guys who had been making noise on the platform and in the carriage came out into the vestibule. Sebastian tensed. Something told him that this was no accident. Nothing good could be expected. One of the guys asked for cigarettes. Sebastian didn't object and handed them 3. "Thank you." Exaggeratedly polite was the requester's reply. Apparently the leader, and even bowed gracefully. Sebastian nodded and was about to leave, but he was blocked by the oldest of the group, a man of about 30. "Wait," the leader asked. "We have something to do with you. At the station we saw that you have a lot of money in your wallet, so why don't you share it with us?" Sebastian realized that there was no way to avoid trouble now, so he gave them the money. But where's the guarantee they'll back off after that? And then, if he honored their request, his family would have nothing to live on for the rest of the month. Get into a fight? But the odds are stacked against him, and Olivia would be frightened. While the man was pondering, the ringleader decided for him. He gave Sebastian a fist in the jaw with a swing. The man's eyes flashed brightly, and he became dizzy. The man, not thinking about what he was doing, automatically retaliated. Sebastian boxed from the age of 10 to 16. The left hook was excellent. The attacker grabbed his head, staggered, almost fell, but the man was immediately attacked by 2 other scumbags. The blows came from all sides. Sebastian was hit in the head, kicked in the back, in the stomach. He couldn't stay on his feet, slumped down on the cold, dirty floor of the vestibule. He tried to cover his head with his hands, but the feet and fists of the hooligans still found a target. At some point, the man realized that he was passing out. There was a strange ringing in his ears, and his eyes went dark. Sebastian fell into a frightening but salutary blackness, where there was no pain or fear. He woke up in the hospital, opened his eyes, and immediately closed them again. The whiteness of the walls and furniture, coupled with the bright sunlight penetrating the room through the open window, was blinding and gave him a headache. He was in a hospital room, his whole body aching as if a train had recently run over him. Or maybe it had. The last thing the man remembered was a hail of blows from all sides and pain, unbearable pain. What had happened to him? How did he end up here? A nurse entered the room, rolling an IV in front of her. Noticing that the patient woke up, the girl smiled warmly. "You did well, you made it. And you came in a very serious condition. No one gave a prognosis." "What? What happened to me?" Sebastian was surprised at how weak his own voice sounded. It hurt to move his lips for some reason. "You were attacked in the vestibule, beaten and robbed, then thrown off the train at full speed. It's a miracle you survived. And your daughter?" "I had a little girl with me, my daughter." Anxiety suddenly squeezed Sebastian's heart with an icy hand. The pain and horror of what had happened receded. All this suddenly seemed unimportant. The main thing was to find out where Olivia was now. "The daughter?" The nurse lowered her eyes. "You will talk to your wife about it later. Now you should rest and gain strength. The injuries are serious and—" "Call your wife," Sebastian demanded. He had to know Olivia's fate at all costs. "I'll call her and let her know you're awake," the nurse promised. "Visiting hours are from 4 to 7. She'll be there for sure. No visitors are allowed in the ICU, but the head doctor will make an exception for you." "Why?" "Well, your case is special," the nurse answered evasively. Sebastian barely waited for Doris to arrive, while he was tormented by uncertainty and speculation. Olivia woke up, didn't see her father, must have cried, attracted the attention of the conductor. She, of course, took her to the police. They found Doris, and she took the girl away. Oh, his little girl was scared. It's all his fault. Why did he leave the girl alone? Couldn't he have waited till he got home? The man was overcome with questions. Why didn't the nurse tell him his daughter was all right? And what did that mean, a special case? The nurse said his wife would only be allowed to see him because it was a special case. What does that mean? Doris burst into the room at 4 o'clock sharp, pale, thin, with shot hair, not at all like his calm and always well-groomed wife. The young woman seemed to have aged dramatically. Deep shadows lingered under her eyes. Her features were sharpened, and her eyes, they were alien and frightening, with despair and terror frozen in them. "Where is Olivia?" Sebastian was the first to ask, struggling to rise on his elbow. Looking at his wife, he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "She's gone." Tears rolled from Doris' eyes. She's gone. Do you understand? You've come to your senses. That's good, because now you can remember some details that will help you find her. Missing how? Sebastian's voice trailed off into a falsetto. The realization of what had happened came over him in heavy waves, making him dizzy. Everything that was happening was like a horror movie or a dream, a nightmare. Our daughter disappeared without a trace. The police are looking for her, interviewing witnesses, but so far, no leads. The men who beat you up have been found. They're in jail. They're investigating you, but they had nothing to do with Olivia's disappearance. We know that for a fact. Sebastian had only himself to blame for everything that happened. Why had he gone to the ponds with his daughter that day? How could he leave her alone even for a minute? Why hadn't he avoided a fight with 3 scumbags for her sake? The physical wounds healed relatively quickly, but the mental wounds did not. After what had happened, Sebastian was no longer the same person. The weight of guilt pressed down on him with an unbearable weight. The police searched for Olivia. The whole city and neighboring stations along the train route, several months were pasted with photos of the girl. There were witnesses who saw a similar little girl in the company of 2 dirty, ragged women. They asked for alms in the crossing, but this thread led nowhere. Sebastian and Doris lived in anxious anticipation, the unknown depressing. The wife did not accuse Sebastian directly, but she did not object when the man called himself names for leaving the child alone. At the time, Sebastian wished he had a time machine, wishing he could go back to the fateful evening. He would hold Olivia's hand, would not let go for a second. The man couldn't even look at the cigarettes now. The couple shuddered with each call. They gave hope and fear. What if now they would tell them that everything was over, that nothing could be fixed? Time passed. The investigation did not move. Olivia was considered missing. The unknown is exhausting mentally and physically. Sebastian could not sleep, and if he forgot to sleep, he had nightmares. The same happened to Doris. After about a year, my wife couldn't take it anymore, packed her things and went to her parents. I can't be in this apartment. It's too hard, with her things and you here. Doris explained. Sebastian didn't try to hold her back. He realized that she blamed him for what had happened to her daughter, and he agreed with her. Who else was to blame but him? Sebastian was left alone, in an empty apartment, once so cozy and warm. Nothing brought relief, neither walking 20 kilometers a day, nor immersing himself in work. Sebastian couldn't eat, he couldn't eat. Immediately I thought, I'm sitting here in the bright kitchen, in front of a plate of pasta, and where is Olivia now? What is she eating? How is she feeling? Sebastian began to doubt that his daughter was alive after 3 years of fruitless searching. By then, he had become a shadow of himself. The man knew from mutual acquaintances that Doris had been hospitalized, unable to withstand the strain. He felt that he himself was close to the same. Salvation came unexpectedly. One day a neighbor from the second floor, a marginal man about 40 years old, came to the fire with a bottle of cheap booze. Sebastian found a snack. The feeling dulled. The world shone with new colors. The man for the first time in several years experienced something like relief. However, the morning despair and guilt came with a new force. This was joined by a hard hangover, but Sebastian already knew what to do. So the man became addicted to the bottle. He soon lost his job. And understandably, who needs such an employee? But Sebastian didn't worry about it. The house was full of things that quickly found buyers: appliances, furniture, outerwear. The man had taken almost everything out of the apartment. Only Olivia's belongings had not been touched. In rare moments, the man realized how worthless his life was now. Why is he even needed in the world? He's a little over 30, and he doesn't want to live at all anymore. He has nothing bright and good anymore, and will not have it. Sebastian has seriously decided that he doesn't want to stay in this world any longer. This was the only way he could end his suffering once and for all, by making a final decision. The man felt calm and even relieved. Soon it would all stop. One morning, tormented by a hangover, he was walking to a local bar. Suddenly, Sebastian's attention was attracted by a strange procession. A woman in a white robe was walking along the sidewalk. She was carrying a stroller in which sat a baby boy of about 3 years old. The same one Olivia had been in when she disappeared. Clinging to the stroller on either side were another boy and a girl. The pair of crumbs stomped obediently alongside, all of the children dressed in identical costumes. They were very different from the usual babies, not making noise, not trying to scatter, not laughing. The children looked beyond serious and sad. Sebastian, who, as it seemed to him, had long ago become callous to other people's misfortune, his heart sank at the sight of this picture. He realized that he had met the abandoned babies from the nearest orphanage. The weather had warmed up outside, and the teacher took the children for a walk outside the gate. The man stared in amazement at the departing company. The teacher looked like a chicken surrounded by little chickens, defenseless, abandoned, and in need of no one. The life of these crumbs had just begun, and they had already faced such a misfortune, ended up in an orphanage. What is waiting for them in this world? Who will help them? Who will support them? Sebastian remembered how much love and care their Olivia had received. That warmth was vital to the babies. Sebastian suddenly realized that it was too early for him to say goodbye to this world. After all, he may still be useful to someone, to make someone's fate easier and happier. There are so many weak people around, needing protection, and he is a healthy, strong man with a working profession in his hands and brains, and such a man can roll mountains if he wants to. No more wasting potential on booze and heavy thoughts. Sebastian is determined to change his life. His daughter is irretrievably lost. It is his fault, but now he has a new goal: to become strong, rich, influential, and make the lives of children who need help better and more pleasant. The man gave up drinking. It turned out to be surprisingly easy. He got a job at the factory again, worked for 3, saved money, gained experience, and after a couple of years, opened his first firm for repair and construction. Employees recruited from his own colleagues, money for materials, and the most necessary equipment he had set aside. So began his journey in business. He had to learn, reorganize, solve problems arising at every step. But everything worked out. The firm grew and strengthened. Soon we had to open a branch, then the next. At first, the office served as an apartment Sebastian, but after some time it became clear it is time to rent a separate building, because the turnover of the company grew by the hour, not by the day. The number of clients and staff increased at the same pace. Sebastian had money. Being a factory worker, the man thought he was earning quite well, but now he had completely different opportunities. Sebastian could easily buy an expensive foreign car in a car dealership, go to the warm sea at any time of the year, afford a large house, and all at once. But the man was in no hurry to please himself with these benefits. He continued to live in his old apartment and drove a budget car. Sebastian spent most of his earnings on business development to have even more income in the future, and every month he spent a lot of money on orphanages and hospitals, transferred money to funds to help sick children, and he also made monthly transfers to Doris's card. She developed a nervous disease that required expensive treatment. The man disguised his help. Doris thought she was receiving benefits from the state. Sebastian was not sure that his ex-wife would accept money from him. By the way, Doris remarried to a lowly library employee, a guy much younger than herself. They had a son. It would seem that the woman's life was getting better, which Sebastian was very happy. But the disease did not recede. The man knew from mutual acquaintances. Someone did not understand the successful businessman, considered him abnormal. It's a joke. Such sums of money regularly spent, it is unclear on what, but most people around Sebastian respected him for his generosity and kindness. Of course, around a wealthy and successful man led a lot of hunters for his heart. Beauties of different ages sought to get the favor of a talented businessman, even quite young and handsome at the same time, but Sebastian remained indifferent to the admirers. It seemed that in his life there is only work and help people who need it. Years went by. Sebastian's company became one of the most successful in the city. The man's name appeared on the list of the richest men in the state, and now he lived in a country house. He liked this area, quiet, calm, no one noises under the windows, and no one working with a drill from morning to night. The man often visited the orphanages, played with the kids, assessed the situation, learned about the needs of the orphanages. Sebastian looked closely at the faces of abandoned children, especially girls who looked like Olivia. What if his daughter had been raised in a similar place? Sebastian realized, of course, that even if she was, Olivia was already an adult. He would not find her here. On one such trip, Sebastian met an incredible girl. Adriana had been volunteering since she was a teenager, first in animal shelters and then in orphanages. The staff praised the responsible student. From the words of the staff, Sebastian realized that the girl spends every free minute in the orphanage, plays with the kids, comes up with interesting developmental activities for them, and even does the most difficult work, which often causes squeamishness and older people, caring for children who cannot walk. Such indifference is rare among today's youth, summarized the director of the orphanage. I don't know what we would do without Adriana. We are very short of hands. She is our lifesaver. Sebastian wanted to talk to the selfless girl. She was very pretty, tall, swarthy, with big brown eyes in which shone pity and kindness. An unusual and very appealing combination. The girl was in graduate school at the Faculty of Foreign Languages, preparing to get a degree. She needed languages to work for an international volunteer organization, and a degree would allow her to teach and convince students to help those in need. While Adriana's peers dreamed of a successful marriage, she herself dreamed of working with starving African children. Adriana was a young woman, only 6 or 7 years older than Olivia, but Sebastian felt a kindred spirit in her, just as he did. The girl could not pass by another's misfortune. She did not leave indifferent, helpless children in need of support. Adriana turned out to be a very interesting conversationalist. She knew a lot about many things. Her judgments were deep and wise beyond her years. Sebastian caught every word of his new acquaintance. She also enjoyed talking to him, and it was very noticeable. One day, Sebastian realized that he had fallen in love. He had never imagined that after everything that had happened to him, such a thing could happen. The man fell asleep and woke up with thoughts of Adriana, with impatience and even inner trepidation, waiting for meetings with her. Sebastian tried to hide his feelings. He is much older, and even with such a weight of guilt on his shoulders. Why would a fresh young girl need all this? She has so many plans, so many aspirations. Yet the man felt that she cared for him too. Adriana was the first to confess her love. They were just helping to unload a car with boxes of baby food for the children of the orphanage. The purchase was paid for by Sebastian. It so happened that in the kitchen, where the director asked them to take the boxes, they were all alone. I couldn't hide it any longer. Adriana suddenly made up her mind. She looked into Sebastian's eyes. You. Anyway, I think I love you and I don't know what to do with all this now. It's unexpected and very pleasant. Sebastian smiled. The girl's words made a strong impression on him, and the man was even confused. The last time this had happened to him had been a long time ago. I know exactly what it looks like. Adriana continued, lowering her eyes. Another girl trying to seduce a rich man. You what? Sebastian gently took her palms in his hands. Could you even let me think that? Couldn't I? My friend, when I told her what I thought exactly that, and she complimented me on my wisdom. So this friend doesn't know you at all. Sebastian was glad to be able to finally tell Adriana how he felt. You're the most incredible person I've ever met. Smart, kind, caring, sincere. Me too. I also can't believe that there are people like you. The girl exclaimed. Me, I'm far from perfect, but I love you. For a long time now, I didn't want to tell you, not to worry you, but it turns out it's mutual and I'm happy. Adriana and Sebastian started dating. They continued to help orphanages, even traveling to a neighboring state. Every day, Sebastian felt that Adriana was becoming closer and closer to him. The man did not delay with the proposal. The girl happily responded with consent. Of course, there were different rumors about them. Then Sebastian accused of infatuation with a young beauty. Then Adriana called Adriana Hunter for millionaires and kept. The spouses cared little. Both enjoyed their newfound happiness, but the trip to poor African countries, which was planned by Adriana, had to be canceled. Soon it turned out that she was pregnant. Sebastian, of course, was happy to know that he would soon become a father, but at the same time he was awakened in fears that had been dormant. Would he be able to protect this child? What if the story with Olivia happened again? Of course, Adriana knew what had happened to her husband's first daughter. The spouses were frank with each other and tried to live without secrets and secrets. The woman supported and comforted her beloved as much as she could. Jordan was born, and a few years later Nora was born. Adriana decided to devote herself to her children. Her career as an interpreter and volunteer work took a back seat. Sebastian marveled at what his son and daughter had accomplished in their younger years. He realized that it was all thanks to Adriana's efforts and patience. The plan was to take a baby, and maybe more than one, from the orphanage. When would Nora and Jordan grow up? After becoming a mother, Adriana realized how little care and warmth orphanage babies receive from volunteers, educators, and other helpers. She had a new idea to give at least a few people from the state institution a full-fledged happy childhood. Sebastian was in solidarity with his wife. Thoughts of Olivia were still going through his mind every day. She was already a grown woman. Where is his daughter now? How is she doing? After becoming a wealthy businessman, Sebastian tried again to find Olivia. When you're rich, you have a whole new set of opportunities. The man hired private investigators, but it was fruitless. Too much time had passed since the child had gone missing, and no leads had been found by the skilled detectives. That day, Sebastian arrived at the office early. He had to finish a few reports before the workday started. The man did not like to stay in the office late. He worked better in the morning, so he left a pile of papers on the desk yesterday. The guard said a polite hello to the chief. He nodded and went to the stairs. There were distinctive rustles from upstairs. The cleaning lady was scrubbing the floor on the second floor. There was a peculiar odor of detergent in the air. Sebastian was blocked by a bucket. He tried to go around it. The cleaning lady noticed it. A young woman with a tired face, strands of blonde hair poking out from under her headscarf. She hurriedly moved the bucket aside so that the boss could pass more comfortably. Sebastian was used to such subservience. Something about this woman interested him. So young, pretty, smart, open face. Couldn't she find a better job? Strange, of course. Careful, the floor is slippery. The cleaning lady said, in a slightly guilty tone. I didn't have time to mop it dry. I thought it wouldn't be long before there were people here. That's all right, Sebastian smiled. And then his gaze focused on a familiar thing from the distant past. On the cleaning lady's chest hung a silver chain with a pendant in the form of a dainty key. It was the piece of jewelry Sebastian had bought on that terrible day when his daughter had disappeared. The man stared at the pendant, and the cleaning lady felt awkward. The woman stood there, not knowing what to do, whether to continue scrubbing the floors or whether the conversation with her boss was not over yet. Sebastian looked closely at the woman's face, big blue eyes, a mole above her lip the same as his. Really? It just can't be? What is your name? The man asked in a husky voice. Olivia. Olivia. My questions will seem strange to you now, Sebastian warned, but it's really important that I know. Is your father's name Ethan? From his middle name. I don't know my father's name. The woman stared at the chief with wide, surprised eyes. Ethan is the name of the policeman who found me at the train station. That's why the orphanage gave me that middle name. His last name, by the way. Her facial expressions, her movements, her voice, everything was so familiar, but Sebastian was afraid to believe in this unexpected happiness, lest he be disappointed. He invited Olivia to his office, where their conversation continued in a more appropriate setting. Sebastian discovered that Olivia had been found at the age of 3 at a train station in a town hundreds of kilometers away. The girl herself remembered little from the stress she'd been under. At least she gave her name, but that was it. Adults tried to find out more about the family and the fate of the child, but they failed. From the stories of eyewitnesses and fragmentary memories of the girl herself, formed more or less plausible version. Olivia was born in a marginalized family. Relatives drove the girl to different cities and earned by asking for alms, and then the little girl grew up. She no longer caused the former pity of passers-by, and adults, for lack of need, left her at the station. And this jewelry... Sebastian pointed his finger at the pendant. Where did you get it from? Do you remember? I think it was given to me by one of my parents. I had it on me when they found me at the train station. I always thought it was strange that someone loved me once. You don't give such beautiful things to children you don't care about, do you? Olivia. Sebastian finally decided to voice his speculation. I must tell you my complicated story. Listen and you'll understand why I'm acting so strangely. And Sebastian told the woman in the chair across from him the story of his lost daughter. Olivia grew paler and paler as he told the story, nervously rubbing the pendant around her neck or a strand of hair that had fallen out from under her headscarf. I think I'm even sure that you are my daughter. Finally, the man finished. I want to believe it so badly. Tears came to Olivia's eyes. But I'm afraid of being wrong, and I'm afraid of being disappointed. We could do a DNA test to be sure, but I don't need one. Sebastian's voice was trembling. He wanted to hug Olivia tightly, but he did not know how his daughter would react to it. After all, she did not know him at all, and did not believe in what had happened to the end. Of course, the analysis confirmed the parentage. Olivia and Sebastian felt it even without the laboratory tests, but this way they had proof. Sebastian felt incredibly relieved. Life was bright again. The man had already forgotten what it was like. The weight that had been weighing on him all these years was finally off his shoulders. There was Olivia, his wonderful, beautiful daughter. What's more, he's already a grandfather with a granddaughter, Ashley. It was an amazing feeling. His daughter had had a hard time in life. Listening to her stories, Sebastian felt despair that he could not protect her then from all these hardships. But now everything would be different. Olivia would no longer have to suffer. He would still be for her, and for her granddaughter, a reliable protection and support. With Olivia and the certified DNA test result, Sebastian arrived at Dora's house. She was crying, laughing, hugging her daughter. Olivia seemed to remember her mom. She snuggled up to her and cried too. Doris was visibly on the mend after the arrival of her daughter. Sebastian arranged for Olivia to join his company as an assistant manager. He created a position specifically for his daughter. She had to sort documents, keep track of the schedule of events, something like a secretary. At the same time Olivia was studying at the university by correspondence. The life of a woman before meeting her father was difficult. She did not get an education. Now she was making up for lost time. She liked her studies very much. Olivia and her daughter now lived in her father's mansion. Ashley quickly became friends with Jordan and Nora. The children had fun, and their laughter never ceased. Adriana accepted Olivia and Ashley like family. She was happy that her beloved husband was no longer tormented by guilt. At first, Sebastian was afraid to go to sleep. It seemed that he would wake up and find that the meeting with Olivia was just a dream. He could not believe that there were such coincidences, and there were many coincidences in history. Olivia had gotten a job at his company, not some other company. Sebastian arrived at the office earlier than usual and noticed the pendant around the cleaning lady's neck. Incidentally, the daughter could have lost the jewelry 100 times over the years, but she kept it and, moreover, wore the key around her neck at all times. Without the pendant, Sebastian would hardly recognize Olivia as an employee. There's no such thing as coincidence. Adriana replied to her husband when he shared his thoughts with her. It's all a chain of regularities. Everything happened the way it was supposed to.